As a parent and a teacher, it's our task to help that child find what it is they need to know. All of us have been on this planet so many times. We've seen each other so many times. I may have been your mother. You may have been my grandfather. When we connect, it's like, okay, here we are again. Those other parts are there, but what's the point of us being together? What do I need to learn from you right now? And that's the piece. And so you've clearly done that in your life. And this whole nature of being kinesthetic and letting yourself move in that direction and talking to your soul is what we need to be teaching kids. And I say that sort of in a funny way because actually you can't teach anybody anything and you can't heal anybody else. You can create a space, a sacred space for them to teach themselves and to heal themselves.
This is Spirit Gym. Today, Paul welcomes back Edmund Knighton to his podcast, and they will be talking about Steiner on children, parenting, and education. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Bioptimizers. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned in this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Rudolf Steiner's perspectives on children, parenting, and education. And as you heard from Penny's introduction, our guest today for the second time on Spirit Gym with Paul Chek is Edmund Knighton, a friend of mine who I have deep love and respect for. Edmund has a lot of experience as a Steiner educator, director of Waldorf schools, consultant, and much more. He's also deeply steeped in the teachings of Ra and has a very comprehensive background and understanding of philosophy, religion, and all related topics. So he's the perfect guy for our topic today. Andy's a father with a special needs child, so he knows not only parenting, but parenting for special needs children, which makes him an absolute perfect guest for our topic today. So Edmund, lovely to have you back.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me. Nice to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Likewise.
So Edmund, to begin our dialogue and exploration of our topic at hand today, which I think is super important, could you share your background as a student and teacher of Steiner's teachings on parenting and children, and share your own experience as a parent and Steiner school teacher to lay the foundation for our dialogue today?
Yeah. So gosh, in the 80s, I was clearly told by a strong connection of a raw being that I needed to figure out some way to get myself attached to the planet, connected to the planet, because I'd basically spent my whole life ungrounded. You know, he said, it could be a relationship or marriage or children. And I was like, no, I don't want to do any of that. And he said, well, how about a dog? And I was like, no, I don't want a dog. He said, well, how about a cat? You know, you just leave it outside and feed it. I'm like, no, I don't want to do a cat. And I don't know how we landed on this, but he told me that I needed to teach children. I was like, wait a minute, let me back up and I'll take the wife and the kid and the dog and the cat. Anything but like teaching kids. As fate would have it, I moved on from, we had an intense connection in remembering who I was and why I'm here. And then I moved on, and I moved on to a place where the individuals I was with had actually started a Waldorf school.
Ah, how funny.
And they said, we'd love to have you come and do some movement work, because movement has really always been a basis for me. And I was like, so I did that. And the thing that really kept me, I have this book here. In 1983, this woman named Gladys in Texas published The Law of One. There are 4 of these books. 3 of them are blue, and one of them is a white book. And so that was the basis that kept me alive when I started teaching, was just referring to Ra and remembering who I am and why I came here. So that's how I found Waldorf teaching in 1989. And I went away crying every day from teaching, because I sucked at it.
I thought you were crying because you were happy.
No. I did have a strong connection with Steiner immediately. I had this beautiful dream of being one of 3 students sitting with him in a classroom. And I said, okay, it's clear that there's a connection here between me and this teacher. But the teaching, I just thought, I'll never never be good at this and I'll never want to do this. But I just hung in there, which I do. I don't give up when things get tough. I just hang in. So that was my introduction to Waldorf education. And then with that school, I became a class teacher, a main lesson teacher, because we needed to split a class. So I had this opportunity to get into the classroom as well as outdoors teaching. And I did both, and I loved that. And the next year I met my beautiful wife. She's been a Waldorf teacher since 1990. So that was my drop in to Waldorf education. And within a short amount of time, I felt the need to go deeper and joined the society at that point and joined the first class. And there's something called the Esoteric Youth Circle. Those, again, just confirmed the things that I had already learned with Ra, that and with my teacher, who was a being of Ra, that this is my path. This is what I need to be doing. And then just about 13 years ago, we were surprised and welcomed by a beautiful son. And his mom ended up really moving with him all the way through from preschool, from the mom and tot program from 18 months, all the way through doing it as an assistant. She took 10 years away from teaching. And then she just got pulled right back into teaching. And he's followed her from first to fifth grade. So he's been in her classroom. And his name is Liam, and he has Down syndrome and autism. And he's an angel incarnate. While I was reflecting on being with you today and preparing yesterday, it's just amazing how he is able to perceive what is needed in the field. He's able to perceive what I need, and he just quietly goes about his business and makes it happen for me. His level of intelligence is beyond everything that I could imagine. And the connection that he has, because the intellect, the kind of rational mind, he's chosen in this incarnation not to have that be as active. He's always connected. So he has been my greatest teacher for everything, far beyond Ra or Steiner or anyone else.
That's amazing.
So that's a little bit of my picture as a parent of a child who is now in the Waldorf school and moving through the school as well.
That's great. Edmund, having spent many years as a Steiner teacher, how would you summarize the difference between children that graduate high school as Waldorf students versus those from public schools or other institutions?
Well, my experience of them and most of the college recruiters and people who encounter them is that's what brings those parents who are looking for education to Waldorf, is they meet these young people, particularly not just coming out of 8th grade, although those are cool kids as well. But these seniors, they'll blow you away. They know who they are. They know what they need to learn. They know how to learn. They have a strong sense of themselves. They don't have to remember what their mission is. In most cases, they've been facilitated to figure it out because the curriculum moves through all of the epochs of human civilization with the onus on the teacher to have the kids be the curriculum. And so meditate on these kids every night and bring what their souls are bringing to them out of that meditation, and because you can't cover all of history, but you can cover the history that the children that are in front of you need to hear in order to remember who they are. And that is the essence of Waldorf education, is reincarnation and karma. And to only remember those parts that are necessary to fulfill whatever it is that you've come here to do. And these kids, their emotional intelligence, their capacities for resilience, their artistic capacity, their creativity of bringing something new to the world, their social capacity, all of it is just off the charts. And of course, there are outliers, as there are everywhere. But in general, feeling them interact gives me hope for humanity.
Yeah, it's interesting because a couple of years ago, there's the Waldorf schools will put on various fairs and things. And the school that Mana was at that time, we were living in Vista, so we were in a different Waldorf school. But they had I can't remember what the reason was, Halloween or something like that. But it was like a festival where the public could come, and it was all Waldorf. All the booths were Waldorf schools, and some of them were Waldorf school children and graduates that were offering something. And I remember as I was walking around, I came to a booth that there was 2 Waldorf kids that were recently graduated from the 12th grade, and they had started their own little business making homemade chocolates. And I was amazed talking to them about their chocolate and their process, and just how very awake they were, and how you could feel their souls were really right in their body, and that their heart was very engaged in their process. It wasn't like kids that had been encouraged to sell lemonade to make money on the side by mom and dad. The best way I could describe it is I felt the same feeling that I get when I begin a project that I feel is really important, like Spirit Gym, and my heart and soul are deeply engaged, as opposed to it just being another kind of test run to see if we could make some money. And they were very present. They looked you directly in the eyes when you talked to them. There was no fidgeting around or sense of being distracted. And I really love that. And one other story I'd like to share, I don't know if I ever told you about this, but when Mana entered the first grade, he switched to the Waldorf school here near us, which turns out to be an absolutely excellent school. I think even better than the one he was in before. And at the beginning of the year, you come in for a meeting with the teacher, and they sit you down with your child, and they take you through the whole curriculum, and they have a one-on-one meeting, let you ask questions, show you where the child will sit, and lets them choose a desk, and the whole process. And at the end of the meeting, the teacher, whose name is Miss Janice, a lovely lady, she looked right at me and she said, "And Paul, I have something I would like to share with you." And I thought, oh my God, here I am in my kid's school meeting. I'm already in trouble. I haven't even opened my mouth yet.
Just like old times.
Yeah. And she said, I don't know if you remember, but I think she said 9 years ago, I took your holistic lifestyle coach level 2 training. And it was you that introduced me to Rudolf Steiner's concepts. And I was so moved by what you taught us that I immediately found a Waldorf school and put my son in it. And I was so amazed. I went to school with him every day, and I was so in love with the philosophy and what they do that I offered to assist. And then I realized I should become a Steiner school teacher. So I did the 4 years of training. And she said, so here I am now teaching your child because of what you taught me. And she said, I still have your book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And I have applied all the teachings of your holistic lifestyle coach to my family. And we're all very healthy and grateful because of what you taught us. And me and Angie and Penny all got tears in our eyes. And it was just such an amazing, wild, synchronistic type moment where I realized that, wow, all these years ago, I didn't know it, but I was inspiring the woman that would become my son's school teacher and now is an amazing teacher for so many other children. So it was such an amazing experience. I just thought I would share that with you and the listeners because, love is a boomerang and you never know when the surprise of your efforts to help others will come home to reinvigorate your own life,
Yeah.
Well, if Steiner were alive today to comment on the situation with parenting children and the health and education factors at play in the world today, what do you think he would give as a diagnosis and an offering to restore harmony?
Well, I think the diagnosis is clear. We're in it. And it's like being in a beaker. Somebody's just slowly turning up the heat. And the opportunity, I think, with all of the negativity that is on the planet is to realize that the moment contains love. And Steiner and Ra would both say that love is the greatest protection and is the solution to any situation, because negative entities can't abide really being loved. They just don't get it. It's confusing for most of them and depolarizing, if not confusing at the same time. I think his diagnosis would be all of the things that I said were going to happen have happened and are happening and will continue to happen. And as we move toward that, you've now had 100 years of kids who've been educated with Waldorf education, and they've become adults. And so some of them are elders now. Some of them have actually passed, but there's a whole multi-generation, 4 or 5 generations now of young people who have had the opportunity to remember who they are and to move toward what it is that they came here to do. So look to those individuals, because as most of us know the saying, you can't solve a problem at the same level that it was created. Those of us who have had a sort of a normal education don't necessarily have those capacities built unless we've trained them as adults. And so letting those youth be the harbingers of the future and the ones who provide creativity. I'm sure that's what he would suggest.
Yeah, it's just for those that may not have listened to my episode 250, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman, I did quite a comprehensive search of Steiner's predictions and warnings for the future, ranging from the late 1800s through to about 1925. Was it 1925 when he
Yes.
left? So I had 28 references in there. So those of you that are interested in Steiner's predictions for the future and the challenges we would face and what they mean spiritually, you can listen to episode 250, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman, which is a 5-hour special. And it's the first one that features both Angie and Penny as readers. So it's really produced like an audio book. And it was the most listened to podcast of all my podcasts in 2023, which really blew my mind for a 5-hour episode. But I had feedback from all over the world from people that just said that podcast blew their mind. So it was great for me because I put an entire month of work into making that one podcast, and Penny and Angie did a lot of work too.
Mm.
Did you get a chance to listen to that one, Edmund?
I did.
Yeah.
So wonderful.
Yeah, great. So Edmund, there's an old saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And it's really something I think is quite true when we consider the challenges that children are facing worldwide today. I've worked with countless children in my practice as a therapist over the 40 years of my career, and many of them were athletes that were in special schools that were designed for athletes. Basically, they go to these schools that cater to producing elite athletes. They could be hockey players, gymnasts, almost any sport. The kids often had problems that I track back to parental relationships and challenges in parental relationships.
Mm.
I'll give you a quick example. I was working with this 13 or 14-year-old boy who had a lot of digestive and health problems, and he was in a school for elite hockey players. When I analyzed his diet, I could see that, he was eating a lot of packaged and microwave food and, stuff that was like instant breakfasts. And I'm like, this is no way you feed an athlete. I said to the parents, I said, I really need to talk to you about your diet and what you're feeding the kids. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, his mother was a personal trainer. I think the father was a stockbroker or something like that. When I was trying to explain to them, not only was this food they were eating bad for the child, it was bad for the rest of the kids and for them too. What happened was an argument broke out between them. And Dad was saying, look, I get up early to go to work. I can't feed the kids. And Mom was saying, I've got too much pressure on me to go train all my clients. They were both saying that neither of them had the time to actually make breakfast for their children or to feed their children. And it turned out that they were pretty much living off of, packaged things and TV dinners and garbage, which was really shocking to me because the mother was a personal trainer. So the point I'm bringing up is like having worked with so many children and even a lot of elite athlete children, I find that these parenting issues, such as not really understanding what real food is or not making it a priority to make sure that the kids actually even begin their day with real food, because making money is more important than real food. But I can tell you for sure, the school this kid was in was probably at least $60,000 a year. Uh-huh. And I know for a fact that, one, they could afford my help, and there was plenty of signs that it wasn't a money problem. So it's a real interesting issue because people with that much money could have easily hired a skilled nanny. They could have done anything they wanted to.
Yeah.
But here's their elite athlete child in a private school who's got all sorts of health problems that clearly track right back to the diet. And I had to witness an ongoing battle between them as to who's responsible for taking care of this.
Yeah.
And I've had to deal with these kinds of conflicts all the time. Another one, just to sort of make the point, I was dealing with somebody who is now an extremely famous athlete, multiple gold medal winner, who at the time came to me before he was famous with his mother, and he was a winter sports athlete and had quite a bad injury to his anterior cruciate ligament. And I said to his mother and him after I did my analysis, he needs to stop performing his sport for at least 3 months while I rehabilitate his knee, because the knee is so unstable that if he keeps on stressing it, he'll unwind everything I can do as fast as I can fix it. He'll destroy it and you'll just be wasting your money. And worse yet, he'll end up with a knee that's highly susceptible to a much more serious injury and will require surgery. And the mother immediately said, no, he can't do that. He's got a Budweiser commercial he's got to film this weekend.
I knew that was coming.
And he's going to get paid, I think, $30,000 or $60,000, and he's got to do that commercial.
Right.
And in the commercial, he had to make a huge jump. I'm trying not to say too much to keep the privacy of the client, but
sure.
So the mother flat out refused. And I said to her, I said, look, if you keep working your son like a plow horse, you're going to threaten his career seriously. And ultimately, I told the mother, I refuse to work in those conditions because it's disrespectful to the child and it's also disrespectful to his future. I can't remember how long I worked with him, but I said, come back to me when you're ready to do this properly. Otherwise, problems are going to happen. But fortunately, the kid made it through it and has went on to win several gold medals now and is world famous. But that's the classic kind of stuff I ran into with parents very, very regularly. One of the things that's happening is parents are quick to take children to various doctors and psychologists for a diagnosis. And as you know, this usually leads to the risk of the child believing the diagnosis and manifesting it as a nocebo reality, and the parent directing their consciousness to what's wrong with their child as opposed to what's right with their child. And that causes the risk of the child becoming an object that needs fixing, like a computer with software problems or a machine with a broken part that needs to be replaced. So would you share your thoughts as a parent and a Steiner educator as to maybe some enlightenment on how parents might need to look at these types of situations in their life and their children, issues of rushing off to a diagnosis. And oftentimes I don't think parents or teachers really understand what we would call normal behavior for children. Like I see my son Mana, and he's got all the same behaviors that I had as a child. I couldn't sit still. I had too much energy. I asked a lot of questions, which teachers didn't like. I needed movement. I couldn't be trapped in a chair for very long. My mind was very fast, and school often felt very boring to me. But I didn't have a Waldorf school teacher, so what I ended up having was a lot of visits to the principal's office, which could lead to some painful experiences at home, unfortunately.
Yeah.
None of which changed the nature of my soul and ultimately led me to leaving school after I finished the 9th grade, and 3 months into the 10th grade, I just couldn't take it anymore and I left. The beauty of that is I don't think I could be the person I am today or have done what I did in the world if I hadn't have listened to my own soul. And the thing that really led me to making the decision, Edmund, and I want to share this for the listeners too, is that, we had a 142-acre working farm, and there was often situations where equipment would break and we'd have to have a welder or a specialized mechanic come out, or we had animal issues that veterinarians had to come out and deal with, such as animals eating chunks of barbed wire fence and all sorts of stuff. When you have a lot of animals, you don't realize until you have a lot of animals what kind of crazy stuff can happen.
Yeah.
I also had a couple of my best friends in school. Their father was quite a famous mechanic who built NASCAR racing engines and was a master mechanic in the Navy. And he had a beautiful garage downtown where he did auto repairs, and he also worked on all the local race car drivers' cars that wanted his help because he was obviously the best mechanic in the area. And so at 12 years of age, I began working in his Mr. Roller's garage and learning his very, very strict rules for how you keep things clean, orderly. So I began first, every car that came in, we had to wash the engine so it was spotlessly clean, which could take 2 hours to clean the whole engine compartment. Then when we were doing things like tune-ups, it was my job to take out the spark, all the menial stuff that a 12-year-old could do with guidance. And so I did that for probably, I don't know, a year or more. And I did it just because A, he paid me some money and I would run to the parts store and grab stuff. And B, I got to be around this super, super smart guy. And the point was is that by the time I got to the 10th grade, I had come to the conclusion that I had learned more oftentimes from a 10-minute conversation with some welder or veterinarian and hanging out with Mr. Roller than I had learned in all 10 years of school. And why should I be here when I'm not learning anything that even interests me? And my parents' rule was you can leave school anytime you want, but you have to leave home if you leave school, and you have to be ready to support yourself because we're not going to support you. So by the time the 10th grade came, I said, that's it. I would more than happily be on my own. And I never looked back. Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've heard me bragging about Paleo Valley over the years of listening to my podcast, and there's a very good reason for that. Not only do I love the genius of Autumn Smith, a holistic nutritionist, but her products are phenomenally good. My kids love them, I love them, and we all use them every day. My students love them, my clients love them, and they are absolutely top notch. One of my kids' favorite snacks is Paleo Valley's bone broth in chocolate. They love to make their hot chocolate drink themselves simply by whisking up collagen-rich protein powder in a mug of hot water. And I'm happy to let them indulge, as I know it is packed full of great nutrition for them in the disguise of a sweet treat. Even us big kids love our sweet treats, and isn't it great when we can enjoy something that not only tastes great, but is truly great for us? Paleo Valley's 100% grass-fed bone broth protein is the only of its kind made from truly grass-fed cows raised on pesticide-free grass pastures. It's made from bones, not hides, slowly simmered to extract the proteins and nutrients. Gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and dairy-free. The chocolate mix includes organic coconut milk powder, organic cacao bean, organic monk fruit that makes a sweet, creamy, delicious drink that my kids, family, and friends just can't get enough of. You can also add to smoothies, use it in baking, or mix it with your coffee for a healthy mocha treat. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is also available in vanilla and unflavored. To try Paleo Valley's excellent bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase, go to paleovalley.com/lowercase CHEK15. No promo is required. That's PALEOVALLEY.com/CHEK15 to get your 15% discount as a Living 4D listener. No promo code is required, and I promise you, not only will you love this stuff, your kids will love it. You can giggle and laugh because they think they're getting a sweet dessert right before bed, but they will love it and sleep great. And boy, do we parents love it when our kids sleep great. Enjoy Paleo Valley's amazing products. These are real realities, all these things we're talking about. And the number of times school teachers told me that I would never amount to anything. I must have heard that 40 times. And as a child, it used to really upset me. But the good news is it angered me to saying, I'll prove you wrong. I think of all the kids, though, that don't have the spirit of a lion in them like that, that actually go the other way and believe it. And it was just because I couldn't hold still or I was getting in trouble or whatever. But the reality of it is they couldn't see the spirit of the person in front of them, which means to me they couldn't see it in any of the children except the ones that were, let's call them mathematically, logically inclined and were able to deal with the mathematical, logical approach to schooling, which is also a problem because 98% of education worldwide comes by way of mathematical, logical learning style, and only 8% of the world population learns well that way. And I'm a very visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, but certainly not mathematical, logical. In fact, I failed reading in the 3rd grade and had to go to summer school all summer to learn to get my reading up so I could stay with the class or I would fail. I never read a book till I was 21 years of age. I hated reading. But once I found something that I was passionate about, I just, was interested in reading. And, now I've read thousands of books, as you know, you've seen my library. But I'm sharing these things to sort of lay the groundwork from my own life experience. And I'm glad I had that life experience, because now that I have children, I can see how important it is to stay in touch with the child and what are their needs, and not put them in a box, and not, diagnose them and say there's something wrong with them and all these other things. So just to review, I'm asking you to comment on what's the danger of diagnosing the child, and what are your thoughts on, Steiner's concepts, or how you feel people, in regard to everything I've just shared and I'm asking, might want to reframe their perception a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the background, because that kind of biography that you just offered in these moments is endemic to Waldorf education. So the Waldorf teacher ideally comes to the home, does a home visit, has a meal, looks at the room of the child, the backyard, how the child plays, how the child interacts with family members. So that it's a systems approach, and it's a biographical approach. When Steiner helped to form new groups of people, what he always said to them, especially something for deeper groups that worked very strongly together in spirit work, is now you must get to know each other very well. And so you don't just show up and do spiritual work and leave. You have to be in harmony as a group. And if you're not in harmony, then you're inviting negative influences. It's the same thing with a couple or a family. It's the same thing with the teacher in a classroom. It's the reason the raw being was able to come through Jim and Carla and Don, because their level of harmony was consistent and at a sixth density level. The approach is, first of all, we could just reflect in a beautiful way on the being of Paul, who's come into this world clearly with a mission. The first thing that Steiner would say about that is, the later you read, the more capacity you have for being a genius.
Well, I should be okay then. 21 before I finished a book.
Yeah, and he suggested 14 being the earliest. If an individual has a kind of a lion heart like you, and a zest for life, and that before then, really these practical skills are essential. And so Steiner's own history was to go through a very practical, technical education, not the arbitum, but the more physical aspect of it, the gymnastic aspect of it. It was the same with the Greeks. Before you give a man a sword, he has to learn how to dance, for example. And so you don't become a warrior until you've become a lover, and until you've figured out enough of who you are, so that you have a sense of compassion for the so-called enemy, which we all know is an illusion anyway. So that capacity to hold off actually on the reading, because reading, as far as Steiner is concerned, is Ahriman's library. Because, and you and I kind of talked about this. I jokingly said, yeah, here's my draft. And I sent you 35 pages of, these are things that we could talk about, but I'm not going to look at it again. Because Steiner himself did that. He would prepare, he would write things down, but he never looked at his notes again. And he went and he paid attention to the people who were in front of him and what they were bringing to him. That's what you're inviting for the parent to do with this child, is let the child be the curriculum. We're learned teachers. We're not just teachers and guardians of these children. These children are also guardians and teachers of us. And it has to be that way to be balanced. And so the one person that you had, for example, to have as a support in your life is all that you need. And this has been shown in thousands of research. It doesn't have to be the parent. It doesn't have to be the teacher. And oftentimes it's not. You find an individual who is being who they are, and then you can be who you are. And they're often very practical. And for Steiner, this was an herb gatherer who had no formal education, Felix Kogutsky, and he met him, I believe, on a train. And that was his first spirit teacher. And this guy knew Mother Nature, and he taught him about Mother Nature. And that got him going on his connection, which ended up at the end of his life becoming a contribution called biodynamic farming, which is way beyond farming. It's really about harvesting, and it's about the human being harvesting his or her own experiences. It's about the farm as an individual, as a being. And for Ra, he clearly says that if we love a piece of land so much, if we love it enough, then what we can have is a capacity for that farm becoming a self-conscious being in its next iteration. And that's an unusual possibility, but biodynamic farms have the best capacity to do that. Just as if we love a pet, or as you said, livestock. If you love an animal enough, no matter what kind of animal it is, it has the capacity to become self-conscious and to actually move into a new density because of your capacity for self-conscious love reflecting on it. And so this is what this capacity is for you to then, you're never going to be able to drive the love of learning out of Paul Chek because he's read it at 21. And so that kind of nature is allowed for children, particularly in a Waldorf education, because there are so many different aspects. There are kinesthetic aspects that are brought in terms of eurythmy, which is not dance, but it is a kind of fluid movement in terms of spatial dynamics or movement education, and then the traditional sports that are actually played hopefully to ennoble the human being, because sport doesn't develop character, it reveals it. And so you want to develop character and then have Waldorf kids in particular exemplify this, winning gracefully and losing gratefully. That's the task. Otherwise, you get into a second density power differential that moves you from being in sport to being a kind of a ruthless CEO, to wartime, to being combative in your marriage and your relationships with friends, always needing to be the top dog. And that's a very weak position for a human being to be in. And so what you want is an individual who has the resilience and the capacity to understand that there is no winning and losing, that competition at the highest level is cooperation. And cooperation, when you're a master, looks like two masters just bowing to each other. And the fight just simply doesn't occur. And this is actually a fifth density understanding for Ra, for example. The fourth density still thinks fighting is a necessary way to go. And that's why protection is still necessary in this density and in the density to come. In this density being Earth in its current iteration with all the challenges. And even in the next generation and iteration of us being in a love vibration where we're transparent to one another, there's still this pugilistic need that we need to somehow fight for what's right. And what if we don't fight for what's right, but what if we just be what we feel is the way to be? And this is where this gets into this question of, you're asking me, I think, in my background in being a clinical psychology and neuropsychology, and the birth of psychology was a medicalized procedure with Freud. Freud actually wasn't even the birth. It was Whitmer-Leitmer way before that, and it was far more enlightened. But what Freud did was became the sort of repository and inheritor of, from the 15th century, when we started to look at the human body for the first time, legally, of course. Michelangelo did it before that, illegally, good for him. And look at the eustachian tube and the fallopian tube and their connection together. We had a spirit connection there, but it quickly went into dissection and analysis. And as you said, mathematics, but mathematics at the lowest level, because that's the gods actually speak to each other in number. And there's a sacred geometrical relationship to existence. But that's not what you're talking about when you talk about how mathematical learning is done today, so-called learning.
Mathematical, logical.
Yeah. And well, the other piece is logical. Logical, the basis of the word logic is actually the logos, which is the creator of this and all universes. And logos is a completely different beast. It's not a beast at all. It has a bias toward kindness and toward consciousness. And so the logic that we have is more of that analytic, which actually cuts things up. But what Freud had as students immediately, he had a threefold cadre, which which later mirror in himself, or sort of at the same time. He had Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of his. He had C.G. Jung, and he had Roberto Assagioli. And Reich looked at the sacred body aspect of the human being. Jung looked at the sacred soul, and Assagioli looked at the sacred spirit. And all three of them got excommunicated. He also had a fourth individual, pretty summarily, a fourth individual named Otto Rank. And not many people know about this guy.
I do. He's written some great books.
Yeah. He's written, for example, The Trauma of Birth. And we'll get into that perhaps in a bit here. But in addition to that, he was really the precursor for expressive therapies, which Paul Chek would love to be a part of. Relational therapies, existential therapies, Rollo May gives him credit. Even the onset of social work was credited to him. Jesse Taft wrote a book about that capacity. Carl Rogers became a student and understood through Ronk's work about unconditional positive regard and how to work humanistically and have actualized experiences. So this guy is an incredible luminary. He's one of the most powerful figures in psychology. And had he been the dominant voice rather than Freud, who said it's all thanatos and eros, it's all sex and death and drives, then we wouldn't be looking at this diagnosis as limiting factor. And because that's all first and second chakra activity, is the idea of sex and death doesn't even get out of first chakra. And we have 6 more chakras to go. So these individuals are the balance point to that. And there are many that have come after them, luminaries like Ron Kurtz, who went to MIT and combined the 3 of those together. And Steiner himself combined the 3 of those together in his threefold aspect of thinking, feeling, and willing, which he has a 7-fold aspect for willing, 1 aspect of will for each of the chakras, for example. And it's good for couples to look at what aspect of will am I working out of right now in communicating with my spouse or with my child or at my job. And we can briefly move into that at some point if it feels right. But this anger then that you talk about that comes up because you're not being met is an incredible motivating force. And to be able to use it, this is an aspect that Ron Kurtz for Hakomi, for example, would be called supporting your defenses. Your defense is anger. And instead of pathologizing that or making Paul wrong for becoming angry, a good therapist would actually support that and allow the anger in your thinking to intensify and to drive you into exactly where you want to go. And then it disappears on its own. The anger actually dissipates because the catalyst, and Ra uses this term of catalyst, has now been used absolutely effectively. If anger is now choose to turn against your parents and now I'm a victim and I'm going to become a bully at school, then the catalyst has been missed. And another catalyst will have to be designed and generated by you in order to experience what you missed. And that missing experience can also be provided. And this is the beautiful thing about human beings. At any time, transformation can happen at any time, no matter how traumatic your history is, even if it's been not just developmental, but incidental. And the incidentals have been absolutely horrifying. Individuals have stories of, for example, women in childbirth scenarios where their intensity of childbirth lasted so long, they were out of their body, they were completely exhausted, they were near death's door, because this is often an initiatory experience. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, I just got a download for who this being is that's coming through me right now. And I can't even feel or find all of the sexual rape that occurred to me, all of the neglect that happened, all of the negative statements that mom said to me. I can't find or feel them anymore. They're gone. And so insight is not necessarily required, and nor is years of therapy in order to transform. It may be a moment with Paul in the shop, finding a relationship to himself. And this is the thing. We need to learn that which we need to know. So as a young person, that's our task. And as a parent and a teacher, it's our task to help that child find what it is they need to know. All of us have been on this planet so many times. We've seen each other so many times. I may have been your mother. You may have been my grandfather. When we connect, it's like, okay, here we are again. Those other parts are there, but what's the point of us being together? What do I need to learn from you right now? And that's the piece. And so you've clearly done that in your life. And this whole nature of being kinesthetic and letting yourself move in that direction and talking to your soul is what we need to be teaching kids. And I say that sort of in a funny way because actually you can't teach anybody anything and you can't heal anybody else. You can create a space, a sacred space for them to teach themselves and to heal themselves. And that's what I want to invite in this situation is you, Paul, found your way to it yourself, but you're a lion heart. A lot of these kids are not going to find their way to it themselves. And so we need to identify who these kids are because they're often the ones in the classroom or in the family unit that are either the identified patient, which means it's a good old-fashioned scapegoat. We have challenges in this family, and if we didn't have this kid, we'd all be fine. Same thing in the classroom. God, if this kid were just not here. So you get rid of the kid, and then you get 3 more like him.
Mm.
And you wonder, well, that's interesting. You get rid of the kid and you get pregnant, and man, now you got a child on your hand. You're really trying to figure out, what am I doing? And I don't mean get rid of the kid as a parent. I just mean in terms of the way we started subtly shutting our hearts down. The self-talk that we say that they really don't feel like they're part of the family. We still feed them, we still house them, but our souls start to do this little closing that's subtly incredibly powerful. It'd be better to be smacked across the face, because then at least you know what's going on. But a child feels this in this subtle thing, and so identifying that there are these capacities that we can have to see these quiet children, the unlion-hearted ones, and to create a space to help reflect to them so that they remember who they are, they remember what they need and how to get there. And remembering that each individual on the planet is unique, absolutely unique. There are no typologies that work. They all break down at some point. Acupuncture only works to a certain extent because my energy runs absolutely differently than yours and every other person on the planet. We're like snowflakes. No two are alike. And that requires us to unlearn, which is another thing that Otto Rank 100 years ago brought to us, that to not be able to unlearn things and let things go is the mark of being neurotic. And so Cal's podcast, for example, is As Unlearn. I wonder if he knows that about Otto Rank.
I don't know, but I'm sure he'd love it if you told him that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the idea, is that we have to, and I started this whole piece with the beaker. We have to have a sense of, there is this beaker and there are things that are cooking, but there are also things that are dissolving, that we can dissolve. And there are images and thought forms that we can dissolve each evening before we go to sleep. And we can erase what we think we know about these quiet kids, and the kids that are a challenge or confusing, or that just anger us, or the ones that we find ourselves avoiding. We can actually meet that in a new way by erasing everything we think we know about them, erasing what their sound of their voice is and what their contribution is when they talk, the look in their eyes, even the shape of their body and what their face looks like, their energetic sort of signature in the world, the way that they express their feelings or don't express their feelings. We can erase those things every night as a practice in sleep. We can do the same thing for our spouse, for our parents, if they're a challenge for us, for one of our children. And we can then just in a noise canceling effort of tabula rasa, really just letting go of everything we think we know about that person. And what that does is a number of different things. It gives us, as we wake up, the capacity to learn something new about that child, about that human being. And it gives us the capacity also to gift that to them, because energetically we know that if I think, oh gosh, I know who Paul is, I know how this podcast is going to go, I know how he talks and how he looks. First of all, I'm going to be bored.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, I'm going to hold you energetically in these patterns, and you're either going to have to wrestle out of them energetically, or you won't, and we'll have our sort of same dynamic. And that's what makes relationships go stale. And that's what makes us not be able to be transformative with each other. If I give you absolute openness to surprise the heck out of me with who you are and how you show up, my God, that's always just beautiful and amazing.
Yeah. You know, one thing you mentioned earlier is that reading was an Ahrimanic influence, but there's probably the majority of people listening to this podcast wouldn't understand what that means. Maybe you can unpack what Ahriman is and why reading prematurely Steiner thought would be an Ahrimanic influence, or suggested that it was.
Yeah, so reading, if you look at the activity of reading, it's a pixelated activity. We have these single letters that have been removed from the pictorial script that we used to have with Isis and Osiris and Horus, for example. And we've abstracted them away from the picture, which actually engages the soul and only engages the intellect. So now you have this linear reality, and you're stringing them together just as we do right now when we're on this screen together. All of these things that we think we see, the face of Paul is really just dots. It's really just boxes and pixelates, and it's an illusion. And so we're stringing these things together and trying to ascribe meaning to them, but we're only engaging unless we're able to overcome it with our consciousness, which for children is very tough, and do whole body reading and look at reading actually with the eyes of our heart, or the eyes in the back of our head, or between our shoulder blades. So we have to actually enliven reading. Otherwise, we are killed by it. And not in a good initiatory way of being killed by it, or the little death of an orgasm, but in a way where it is stultifying. And so we have the task when we read to bring something back to life. We have the gift, which is an Ahrimanic gift, and it started in the 15th century, to be able to see matter in its pixelated form, in its very, very sort of dot matrix form. And that allows us to see nature. It allows us to see the things of the world in more clarity, telescopes and microscopes and so forth, and to penetrate into matter deeper than a human being has ever been able to do that. That's the gift of Ahriman. That's the gift in us. The opposite of that is the Luciferic gift to be able to expand in ways we have never been able to understand expansion before. But in both cases, we have to be the anchor that brings ourselves back to, as you used the word normal earlier, normal life. Just chopping wood and carrying water and being a good father, being a good mother, being a good son, being a good teacher, whatever it is that you are. We always continue in that. We don't let that go. We don't let our connection and love to the earth and our brothers and sisters go, ever. And the same thing with this kind of reading. And this is one of the shadows of Anthroposophy and Waldorf education, is there's so much gold that this man spoke, and he spoke almost all of it, by the way. There's 6,000 lectures. That means they were spoken just as, Paul, you do when you get with your group. You're talking soul to soul. You're listening and feeling. That's what he did. And then it gets written down by somebody who happened to be listening, a stenographer or somebody in the group. And now we have all of these things that were not necessarily intended to be written down. And he said, clearly, you're missing the spirit of the language if you take it out of the original language, no matter what language you put it into. So for all of us, it's now 3 times removed. It didn't come directly from him in speaking. It didn't come in a German form. And we're taking it in English and trying to figure out what this is. We have to now bring this back to life. And it's a 3-stage process to enliven it again, to ensoul it, to inspirit it. It's a lot of work. That's too much work for a child. This child is joyful and playful and innocent and loving and sweet and needs plasticity in order to be neuroplastic, needs the resiliency of being out in nature. And the difficulty is it's like giving an 8-year-old the keys to this beautiful car behind me that my buddy's letting me stay in his shop, his fabrication shop, this Ford. It's like giving the keys early. It's like giving a glass of wine at 10 years old. It's heady wine to be able to read. And you can hear the sort of, badge that you get to wear of like, yeah, I started reading when I was 3. Oh yeah, I started reading when I was 5. I read this book. And the sadness that's associated with that, because what that does is the intellect starts to drive childhood out of that human being. And it's addictive. It's like sugar.
Yeah, there's another problem involved in that most people don't think about that I'd like to put on the table here, and that is when you're reading, I'll preface by saying, look, I was raised on a farm, and I spent a lot of time around sheep, horses, cows, pigs, chickens, goats, sheep herding dogs. We had cats. We had a lot of cats because we had rat problems in the barn. So my dad bought 9 cats that we just let loose in the barnyard, and they took care of the rats. And I had a favorite cat that just had a kinship with me. So if you take a kid like me and you give them a storybook about life on a farm, as I'm reading the symbols that has the letters SHEEP, DOG, COW, HORSE, CHICKEN, MANUER, etc., I actually can transcend the symbol and connect the feeling and the smells and the sounds and the relationship to the word. And that gives me a basis to discern whether or not whoever wrote this is either just making stuff up or doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So because all letters are actually symbols, when you're reading something that someone writes about the cat, there is no cat there. So you have to actually use the mental faculty to impregnate the word with whatever your mind wants to throw in there. And if you don't have any experience, then your mind can throw any kind of anything in there that can take you far from the actual reality that's maybe intended to be conveyed in the writing. So the point I'm making here is that what happens is that it creates an illusion of knowledge based on symbols that are impregnated with whatever other people put in there or whatever your own imagination puts in there. But if you don't have any experiential basis to connect to what you're reading, then you're actually very likely to believe in illusion. And being a therapist, for example, I've read hundreds of studies that say exercise does nothing for back pain or nothing for these various orthopedic injuries. And then I would look up the research studies, and it was obvious to me they didn't even have a clue how to design an exercise program for anything that they were trying to do it for.
Yeah.
And so the point I'm making is, you see, I have a lot of experience and a lot of research background and a lot of study and a lot of hands-on experience. So when I read those words, because I have a reference point, I'm not susceptible to being impregnated with the false ideas that are being conveyed by the words. But countless millions of other doctors and therapists and personal trainers and strength coaches have been poisoned because those symbols came without any basis in reality as a reference point. So my concern about too much reading for children is we don't want kids reading about when they can be experiencing directly.
Yes.
And we've created this academic environment starting as early as kindergarten, where kids are actually taken out of the very milieu that a child is designed to be raised in, which is a natural environment where there's frogs and there's water and there's dirt and there's grass and all the things that they provide at a lot of Steiner schools. And so the kids are going to school and are unfortunately being filled with ideas and beliefs that are programmed into them by the ruling class. And we've seen that, for example, since COVID, we now have the libraries of children as early as first grade full of pornography books and books confusing them about their gender. And I've seen countless school board meetings where parents are literally bringing books right out of the library and reading passages out of them in front of the whole audience that are so shockingly rated X that even the board directors don't want them reading it in public. Yet this was found by their 5 or their 6 or their 7 or their 8-year-old in the library, where the child's going to read this. And this is also something Steiner warned about. He said making children too conscious too early is a significant burden that can create a crisis for that child. And to have exposure to some of these things in childhood and exposure to too much responsibility, it can lead to, I've seen young children that I've worked with in a midlife crisis as early as 18 or 19 years of age, because they've taken on the burden of so much of the awareness of the pathology and the challenges, not only of the world, but often of their own parents, that they feel this deep remorse in their heart, but also this deep sense of having to raise their siblings or raise their parents, or mom's not doing her job as a mother. So Susie's tasked with raising 3 children while trying to get good grades and navigate junior high school or even elementary school. And so it leads to an environment where you've got this young person who's been pushed far, far too forward in her acquiring of consciousness, instead of having the freedom to have imagination and explore and experience and color and sound and dance and art and singing and the things that we really shouldn't be grading kids on anyhow. I mean, the number of people I've had in my healing work and in my classrooms where I'm introducing art as part of the therapy or the healing work, that are deathly afraid to even draw anything because of the reprimand and the judgment they got in school when they were drawing something, and it destroyed their little soul. And so these are things that I think are important for parents to really realize. And the other really serious problem is a lot of kids' self-esteem is very damaged because they find out if their report card doesn't meet mom's or dad's expectations or even the expectations of their friends. Like if they get an F or a D, they might get heckled to death by their friends and called stupid and blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a lot of pathology in the grading system because I don't think that certain activities should be graded. They should simply be inspired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are many schools that don't do any kind of grading all the way through to, Quest University or New College at the University of South Florida. There are highly respected programs that use written evaluations that are very substantive. So of course, it takes quite a bit more from the professor to know the student and not be able to mix them up with just a whole bunch of other students. And Waldorf, of course, does that. Waldorf has had its share of adding grades to things because Steiner's admonition was really that a child should never be a stranger to their culture and human beings either. Teachers really have to stay on top of current events, for example. And so some schools have felt that it's important for their students to have a sense of what it means to be graded. Again, it's just like reading. How you bring that is everything. How do you bring what we do to grade individuals? And there are ways to do it that are not deadening to a child's soul. And the whole nature of grading another human being is almost a godlike function. But even gods don't assess that level of judgment because they understand that we're judging ourselves plenty and they don't need to pile on. And so it devolves into a very human aspect.
Well, the holiday season is already upon us, and I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling a little bit overwhelmed. With all the demands of the end-of-year tasks for the businesses, holiday preparations, gift shopping, and all the family get-togethers, it can all be a little bit too much and a big source of stress. Well, that's why I'm here to tell you about Stress Guardian, because this is the latest scientific breakthrough from Bioptimizers, which, as you know, if you're a regular listener of Paul's podcast, is the company that makes some of his favorite and must-have supplements. Stress Guardian is packed with a blend of 14 adaptogenic herbs to help you regulate your stress response naturally, and so giving you some more control over your holiday stress. With daily use, Stress Guardian becomes your personal shield against seasonal tension, enhancing both your mental and physical well-being. So say goodbye to just surviving and this holiday season thrive with Stress Guardian. To get a head start on reducing your holiday stress, visit bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code PAUL10 for 10% off your first order. That's bioptimizers.com/living4D and the promo code is PAUL10. By the way, Bioptimizers is so confident in their products that they offer a risk-free 365-day money-back guarantee. So you absolutely can't go wrong. And I highly recommend that you try Stress Guardian today.
The sexual piece, I think, is important to mention because there's a way that you can proof your children away from those things by your earliest relational capacities with each other sexually, and by the way that you bring and invite this child, really invoke this child from the spiritual world towards yourself. And that's really starting at the top and working your way down with any kind of relationship. Because the first nature of sacramental union is very sexual in terms of the way that we use that word. This is, again, at a 6 density level, you can understand that the ability to have orgasm becomes a whole body orgasm, but then even that drifts into obscurity and even a distraction and a disruption from the more subtle, blissful, and abiding experience that individuals have when they love each other sacramentally, when they understand the other person is the creator. And if you bring a child into the world with that energy humming, with those energy centers aligned, then first of all, the orgasm that occurs is a mutual orgasm. It almost is impossible to tell what part of that was mine and what part is my partner's. And that, in a way, bully proofs that being coming in from seeing the degradation of pornography or rape and all of these things that children can just touch a button on a tiny screen now and just go, oh, I see something, and now I need to make sense of it. If they have come in and been formed in such a way, they'll recognize health and they'll move toward it and they'll simply disregard this other. They'll have a kind of resilience, the lion heart that you're talking about. That's what we build by having that kind of early relationship where we start at the top, at the violet ray here, and we say, what's your relationship to either spirituality or religiosity or just the sacred or humanism or even atheism and agnosticism? Let's make sure that we're in harmony on the way that we're going to bring a family into this world. And then moving down to how is it that you actually activate that through your own intelligence in an infinite way? That's more at this level. And then how is it that you're going to express that to our children when they come into the world? This is here. And then the heart level is what do we actually think kids are? First of all, they're not our kids.
No, that's a big concept that a lot of parents, most parents don't realize. I've had in counseling parents and in talking about it, and I wrote a chapter with Angie for Ben Greenfield's book. I think it's called Beyond Parenting or something, like a great big compendium of authors that came out last year. And Angie and I provided a chapter, but I said in there, you are not the owner of your child. The parents provide the genes to create the body, but the soul in that child is completely and utterly unique. And it could be a much more evolved soul than the parents or any of the other siblings. And so,
yeah, in all likelihood, today it is.
Well, and not only that, you see, the parents want to fashion the child into what they want, like a sculptor making something out of clay for its own devices. And a good example is the number of patients that I've had that were in a midlife crisis because their parents shamed them into being an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or some respectable profession that wouldn't embarrass the family. But, as
right.
Joseph
or
Campbell
it would make money, right?
Yeah. And as Joseph Campbell says, you spend your whole life climbing the ladder of success only to get to the top and realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. And that's a great way to introduce a midlife crisis or a dark night of the soul. I'm telling parents that ask me about how we parent our kid. My job as a parent is to provide my kid with as many ways to experience itself: musical instruments, farm animals, a go-kart, coloring books, paint. Both my kids love to paint. So they come to my art studio, and we just have a fun time, bombing the canvas with whatever goes at it. The thing that I'm saying is a good analogy is the way they choose the Dalai Lama. They take the new perspective Dalai Lama that they think might be the one, and they put it in a room surrounded by glasses and clothing and objects that are from many people, but they know that the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama can find his own glasses, his own pants, his own wallet, his own notebook. And so I'm saying I just put the kid in a room full of stuff and say,
that's it.
Find your
pants.
Find your pants, find your feet, find your heart, find your musical instrument, find the tools that work for you. Like Mana is clearly showing signs of being an engineer, and he can build things out of Legos that I can't even build. Both of them can beat us in games that, Angie and Penny are both masterful game players. I mean, I think it's rare whenever people come to play games with the girls at dinner time after dinner. I'm like, be careful, you're stepping into a dangerous territory. And many people that said, oh, we're really good at games, I'll give them a go, and got trounced. And I'm like, now I got to go. Now you got to watch out for my kids, because they can beat mommy, they can beat Penny, and they can hammer me. And they do it like it's nothing, And so there's my point. Like, I'm just watching these kids.
Yeah.
Their souls are gravitating. But I'm not saying you're going to be a this or you're going to be a that. My only concern is, can you find something you love to do enough that it gives you the opportunity to make love every day? Because if you don't make love every day, the weight of the world itself can grind you into something unhealthy. And when we have a world full of cultures around the world full of these people that have been ground into something unhealthy, and they're using medical procedures and biohacking and every other damn thing to try to find their soul. It's creating exactly the kind of Ahrimanic Luciferic polarity that Steiner warned about.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. And so this proofing that you're able to do can occur pre-conception. It can occur before this being is even here, because certainly according to Ra, that when we get to a certain level, we're able to design our own catalyst. We're able to design our own experience and our own mission. And that level is the heart chakra level, where we're able to love unconditionally. And so if in the last lifetime we are able to do that and get to that point where we're able to get to loving no matter what comes toward us, then we design these experiences, and both Ra and Steiner say we choose then our parents, and we give them the indication that, hey folks, it's time to get together and I'm coming. And it's at this time that the mom and or the dad, and in particular situations, if other people are open, who are in your life, they can tell you that this individual is making contact with them and ready to come through. This is how my son was born. He was conceived because we had no conception of conception. We had no preconceptions. I was teaching pre and perinatal psychology and somatic psychology, and one of the pre and perinatal psychology doctoral students, upon first meeting me, just said, "Are you pregnant?" I just said no, and then we started talking. I forgot about it, didn't even mention it to my wife. A month later, I saw her again. She said, "Are you pregnant yet?" I said, "No," and she said, "Well, you will be." And again, I just put it completely out of my head. I didn't even think about it. And my wife and I were making love, and she said, "I feel like I was just touched by God at the moment of our orgasm." Again, I didn't think about it, just sort of doofus me. And then she came to me and she showed me the cervical cap that suctions on kind of like a 1,000-pound sledgehammer. That's a mixed metaphor, but there was no way that thing ever comes off, and it was a pancake flat. And it had just been flattened and floating around inside her. And so we just looked at each other, and that's the moment I remembered I had an angel come toward me. And this woman was like 6'2" with long blonde hair and these blue eyes that were like just goddess eyes. She was just like amazing Nordic being. And I came to her and I said, "How did you know?" She said, I just know. I just know when this is coming through. So that nature of being able to know that these individuals are ready to come through, ready to communicate with us. The parents who are awake to that potential can begin to communicate with this one who's coming through. And this one can communicate to them what their needs are. And so the so-called bonding and attachment that we often focus on at the birth moment when we have the physical body, this is so far down the line of what we have the capacity for before that being is even conceived as a spark in the mother. We can be having these in-depth connections with them. And they're often nonverbal. They're often telepathic, because there's 30 distortions for every word that we use, and language is not very helpful in that way. And so if we're able to connect with these beings who are coming toward us in preconception, then the moment of conception, we already have a connection with them. And it also helps us with, if we have trauma that's in our own birth trauma or intergenerationally, we have this kind of connection and familiarity. And so the moment that comes to us where we hear, "You've conceived a child," it can be triggering for individuals unless they've done this preconception work with the being who's coming toward them. Then there's already a connection and love and safety. And this is how you undo intergenerational trauma. This is how you stop that karmic wheel that rolls through humanity. And then you have the 9 months in utero. And in the first 17 days, that being isn't even a being in terms of brain function. There's only this profusion of blood blossoming everywhere and becoming organs, but there's no so-called capacity for a reflective organ called the brain. And yet that being is communicative, and research studies have shown that individuals who get regressed to that point through Dr. David Chamberlain, for example, in hypnosis, have a clear picture of being communicated with, of communicating with the parents, with other family members, a sister or a brother, and there is no reflective apparatus called the brain. And so we know that soul is there. And Steiner gave us a clear picture that the more evolved a soul is, which is to your point, that's what sort of clicked this in my mind, the earlier they get engaged in preconceptual activities to design and fashion their own physical body. And so we have a misconception about heredity being determined by the parents. It's not. That individual, just like the mana engineer that you have in your home, is structuring and designing the situation that he or she needs in order to have the consciousness to fulfill the function, the mission that they come here to do. And the higher the initiate, so a clairvoyant is a sort of a lower level, an initiate would be a second level, and an adept would be someone who can work what would be called magically, which basically means being able to make the collective unconscious conscious in himself. And so he uses that light capacity to design. It's like a CAD design, this incredible structure, this latticed structure that he can move into, and the parents can participate in that. And that's the level of epigenetics that is a whole. Bruce Perry has a picture of that, but I don't think he's ever necessarily talked in this way and connected Ra and Steiner and initiate work with it. But this is the way that we are able to come into the world and have the greatest capacity to fulfill what it is that we came here to do. And I think the best shot for the planet.
My first son, Paul Jr., is 45 now, and I have a grandson with him. Just from teaching so much and traveling the world, and, we've had over 63,000 students in the Institute, I really wanted a break from responsibility. So when Angie got pregnant, I was quite shocked, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to go into this again. But long story made short is I wanted to know who the soul was that wanted to be my child, because clearly I had no desire to be a parent again. And with all the knowledge that I have, I knew that child must have known that. And Penny didn't want to be a parent either. So when I went and met Mana's soul, I was absolutely blown away. I mean, it took the pain out of it, because to your point, Mana, who in that form was not Mana, it was a little Taiwanese woman about 70 sitting in a grass hut on a dirt floor in a rocking chair drinking tea, and her name was Ba Huan, which means white flower. And she said, I've been watching the three of you for years. And she, without a long story, she said, I have chosen you because the three of you each have knowledge that I need to activate the knowledge that I've come to bring the world, because the world's about to go through some pretty significant changes and my knowledge is going to be needed. And I went and met Zoe when she was in the womb early in the gestation period. And she said the same things, but what she was bringing into the world was radically different than what Mana was bringing into the world. And coming from different circumstances and different time periods. But knowing that took a lot of pain out of my heart, because I felt that my personal needs were paramount, because I didn't have the energy and the resources within me to engage the responsibility of being a parent again. And I was just being honest with myself. I need a break from responsibility. I don't need more of it. I'm looking forward to retiring and having no schedule and dot. But once I talked to the souls and I realized how much of an honor it was to be chosen by these souls, and for what reason and what their intentions were, it shifted me tremendously. And Penny, through the love of the children and just the interaction with them, and it opened her a lot too. And it shocked me, because Penny is a woman that really had no desire to be a mother, but here she is, just the most amazing mother. I mean, her and Angie together are just this amazing team of two, what I call MacGyver women. They can do anything. And so they're raising these kids and with me too. And these kids have this magical environment and, a Waldorf education. And this is just what I dream for everyone. This is what I dream for the children of the world. And it's what I dream for the kids caught in all these public institutions that are being fed junk education and junk food. And most of the teachers are burned out and don't even want to be there. They just don't know what else to do with themselves to make a living, unfortunately. And I remember being a child in school, and it was obvious to me which teachers had passion because I was interested in what they were saying. They made it interesting to me, but the rest of them were just going through the motions, and I could feel that. And so I didn't want to be involved in that because there was nothing in it for me. These are the kinds of very important discussions that just aren't happening enough in the world. But when you realize that the children of today are the future of tomorrow, how we raise our children and how we love our children really determines whether or not we will continue to war, pillage, and destroy each other and destroy nature and the planet. And if we're not careful, we can have enough children that are so wounded in the soul that they will actually crave an existential crisis. They will crave a world war that could be Armageddon-like, because they're really bordering on suicidal in the sense that they feel trapped in a hell realm, not in earth. And that is one of the reasons that it was so important for me to develop Spirit Gym, was to help people have a deeper understanding of what life really is all about and what God really is all about and why we're all here and how important it is to become conscious, to be conscious parents. And so those are some of the things that have driven me so hard in the last really 10 years of developing Spirit Gym, to be able to bring that to the world. And it's why it's important for me to find people like yourself and talk to them and meet with them and support them to the best ability that I have where that's potentially helpful. But anyhow, okay, you guys, so we're now at the point where I normally break the podcast a little past. And so the rest of the podcast is typically reserved for Spirit Gym podcast members, which I encourage you to do. For only about the cup and a half of coffee, you can get 4 weeks. That's a month of extended play with amazing people like Edmund. I'm sure you've listened to the podcast enough to know that I only bring on guests with something meaningful to offer and a lot of life experience to share. But today, because of the importance of what we're talking about, I've asked Edmund if he would be willing to, for the podcast members, have a private Q&A instead of chopping the podcast and giving the extended play to the members. And he's happy to do that. So for those of you that are podcast members, or those that you would like to be able to ask Edmund questions directly, you can sign up at paulchek.com for the Spirit Gym podcast membership. I think it's less than $8 for a month. And the extended play podcast members will get a meeting with Edmund on Zoom or similar, in which he will devote probably at least an hour to answering any questions you have regarding the topic of the podcast today. So continuing on, Edmund, what do you feel any expecting parent or existing parent needs to be most aware of so they can effectively navigate the world of parenting and support their child or children to fulfill the child's soul urge that brought them to life?
Well, the first thing that comes to me is the incredible resilience that human beings have. There's even infant-centered family therapy, for example, where whole families can pay attention to the deeper needs of the infant. We're not just talking about changing diapers here. We're talking about what you just asked. How are individuals coming into the world, and what are their needs? And how is it that we can communicate? And this level of communication is so precious that if we can learn to communicate in this way with these neonates, just think about what the capacity is for us to communicate with each other and with everyone else in our world. That this level of transparency and openness to who we are, it's just mind-blowing. And so there are individuals, for example, when my son was born, we didn't do any testing, for example. We just had an amazing pregnancy. I knew enough, being a professor and a department chair of somatic psychology and clinical psychology and pre and perinatal psychology, that all of that testing is just a whole bunch of we don't really know. And I also knew that if a child did have some kind of situation, that the doctors make recommendations in most cases to abort babies with Down syndrome. I can't even imagine not having my son in my life. What a gift and a teacher he is every moment. Wow. When that child came out, they did sort of a CYA, put him in the NICU for 5 days because they're the hospital. Now, to be fair, we had Mary Jackson as our midwife. Mary had delivered 3,000 babies, but our baby came 5 weeks early. And so in coming 5 weeks early, she just couldn't, in either good conscience, ethically or professionally, recommend that we stayed home. And so, of course, we did go to the hospital, but we had already set up a birth plan. My wife and I had both attended birth classes. We'd set up a birth plan. Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara was not interested in having us come as a backup for them. And so we went to this beautiful hospital down in Ventura. It was a longer drive, and my wife's water broke on the way, but it allowed our midwife, Mary Jackson, to be there and to be with us and to be very active in the birth, which was absolutely incredible. What an amazing woman she is. You can imagine 3,000 births. That's a lot of experience. And we went through the birthing process and then found out, not in any nice way, but kind of in a Nurse Cratchit kind of way. I was told after an emergency C-section my wife had, "Oh, you know he has Down syndrome, right?" I said, No, I didn't. I wasn't aware, and it wasn't for you to share it with me. And so, that was the way he came in. And because my wife was not there, and she was medicated, so she fell asleep. But I told her right before she fell asleep, he has Down syndrome. She goes, "Oh God, I thought something was wrong with him."
That's great.
And so she's sleeping peacefully, and I connected with him. But because he didn't have that connection there's a lot of research around the first uninterrupted hour with the mother at birth. And because he didn't have that, he bonded more with me, but he wasn't looking her in the eyes. And as part of our birth package with Mary Jackson, we got 2 sessions with Ray Castellino. And what Ray does is birth simulation. I mean, he's not alive anymore, but you can still do castellinotraining.com, by the way, is and no, I don't get any kickbacks from this, but I'll tell you why I'm telling you how beautiful this man is. He moved Liam, my son, through the whole situation of the birth. And then he did the same thing for both my wife and me, not our child's birth, but our own birth. And so you'll appreciate this as a kinesthetic genius, that movement at the end of the child moving the infant, brand new Liam. He was almost 6 pounds, by the way, 5 weeks early. So God knows how he would have been a watermelon coming out 5 weeks later.
Your wife might have not enjoyed that so much.
Right. And totally healthy, by the way, except for he still has a hole in his heart, but that's no big deal. And so then we had this experience, and he was placed in his mother's arms, my wife's arms, looked directly at her in the eye. And ever since then. And so I can just attest to this amazing shift from not being able to make any eye contact to making eye contact, and how significant it is to have eye contact. And so these possibilities, I want to just say to people, infant-centered family therapy, through birth psychology, their website, this birth simulation, these things are possible. And at any moment, individuals can make a tremendous shift, and especially when they're this neuroplastic, but really until the last moment of life. As Faust showed us, it's possible. Goethe's Faust, it's possible to shift and make the connection and become a completely transformed being. So those are some of the pieces I would say about what's called a conscious conception. And there's also a website, and there are articles around, how do I have a conscious conception? How do I become fully present to myself so that I can become fully present to bringing this being into the world? Those are recommendations I would have for the preconception time, which we've already mentioned, soul-to-soul connection, and keeping that connection throughout, especially the first 3 years of the child, where in the first year, the child learns to walk upright. In the second, the child learns to speak very strongly. And in the third, there's this glimpse of the I being that comes in. And this really comes from Steiner's work and from Carl Koenig's work on embryology, and then on the first 3 years. Those are amazing years where you're pulled out of your normal reality. And if you have the capacity to do that, and especially if dad can take some time off, because dads often get left behind in the whole birthing planning and the process. I was there for the whole thing. That's another reason we chose the hospital we did, so that I could be there from start to finish through the whole process, and be with my child when he's born. It was hugely important for me, and we've been incredibly bonded ever since. So this is that sort of from preconception to conception to the moment of birth and the first 3 years. And then the child really works so incredibly strongly out of imitation during this time that this is called role modeling. It's who we are as human beings that guides everything. So they're just absorbing everything that we bring into them. And if we love doing chores, for example, if we love cooking, everything that we bring love to, they will love. And anybody knows if you haven't built a rhythmic life and built a life where you love to do things, that getting kids to do chores on the back end, meaning when they're a few years old even, they'll just follow you around and they'll do all these things because all they're doing is love. And it's just imaginative play to them. There's no concept of work for a child. So these are things to come in early. The rhythm really builds strength and it builds a sense of safety because a child knows what's coming next. And it builds this deepening quality where they can inhabit themselves and the world. And so those pieces, I would say, early on are really essential to bring. The early years, the child is literally taking this body that she has formed, and she's even more forming it to her own specifications. So she's doing this design modeling for these first, really, Steiner has a picture of human phasic development as happening in 7-year periods. So in the first 7 years, all that child is doing is moving and playing and humor. And I mean, humor is one of the most powerful growth enhancers. Humor that not deprecating humor, but not cynicism, but humor that builds relationship and that connects us together with. There's just so much uproarious laughter. On the other side of humor, what's essential is reverence. And so we're not teaching any of these things. We are reverent toward whatever it is, the one infinite creator, our wife or our husband, our spouse, whoever it is that we're, our partner if we're not married, and whatever gender. None of that is the focus. The focus is that we're emanating this kind of reverence. We're emanating gratitude. We wake up and we radiate this kind of love and light to all of creation every day. The child is lit up by these things, and it builds a kind of a strength for life. The other pieces that are really essential, and you know that we're not going to go through the 35 pages I sent you, but having meals together, either by candlelight, turning out electric lights, and so having a sense of that sacredness. A simple prayer, and the prayer doesn't have to be related to any kind of religion or spirituality whatsoever. But this thankfulness to be able to be with each other, the expression of love that was placed into the food by dad or mom. I'm the cook, so by dad when he cooks it, and the vital energy that's the result of that. That's the thing we're focusing on. And then if things get more challenging, if you have a challenging, sometimes, first or second child, one's great and one is just like, oh my gosh, they never sleep. Liam didn't sleep for the first 7 years of his life because he had very tiny tubes and he was unable to breathe. So he'd just wake up screaming. So we navigate that. Kind of like you said, Paul, went to every doctor you can imagine, but this was a very physiological thing. It's like, this human being can't breathe. Let's go to a doctor. All of them had ideas of what to do, but in the end, it was a soul-to-soul conversation and a very old school doctor who said he just needs a bigger nose. And so, but how do you keep yourself sane when you don't sleep?
Right, it's tough.
One of the things you do is you take an image of that child at his best. And so you see the child in a moment of shiny happiness, joy, movement, and you take that image into sleep. And this helps you to maintain a connection of positivity with that child. If you have a question about, like, for example, why is this child screaming? And we have just no possibility, then forming that into a question and taking that into what's called night school, where I go to sleep with my guides, I get information. It's basically, how do I figure out how to navigate this, knowing that we're just going to have to wait it out, but how do we make it so that we can live and not want to leave the marriage or take our lives or something. We've been to all these places where it's been to that point, especially with a special needs child. 70 to 80% of the dads leave those relationships, and not because they want to, but because they don't have the skills that have been built and that can be built in order to keep them in that relationship. That's why marriages end, not because people hate their wives. They love their wives or their husbands. It's because the skills haven't been developed and they feel completely overwhelmed and outmatched. And all of those things are teachable.
Hi, everybody. I sure hope you're enjoying the podcast. You know, a couple of months ago, Organifi sent me a couple of bags of their new Shilajit gummies to sample, and I was blown away with how great they taste and how much my body loved them. Having used Shilajit paste for many years, I've never been a big fan of the taste of it, but when I tried Organifi's new Shilajit gummies, I was truly impressed. The texture and consistency of the gummies is excellent, and they have just enough natural sweetness to let me feel like I'm getting a lovely, healthy treat for both my mind and my body. Shilajit is a unique, potent mineral paste from the Himalayan mountains. It contains an abundance of trace minerals, antioxidants, organic acids, and nutrient-transporting compounds. It's been known throughout history to help boost vitality and strength. Just pop a couple gummies and chew, or suck on them slowly for a steady release of the delicious, earthly, but slightly sweet natural flavor. Your taste buds will enjoy the delicious treat while your body soaks up the massive amounts of feel-good nutrition. Rich in fulvic acid, humic acid, vitamins, enzymes, bioflavonoids, antioxidants, metabolites, and over 40 trace minerals, Shilajit gummies can help support energy production, support performance and recovery, support healthy muscles, promote collagen synthesis, support healthy hormone levels, increase cellular energy, decrease fatigue, and promote heart health. I absolutely love Organifi's Shilajit gummies and went through 2 bags in no time because my body craved them so much. I reached out to Organifi to get more right away, and I bet you will too. To get your 20% off for Living 4D listeners on your Shilajit gummies, go to Organifi, organifi.com/CHEK20. On checkout, use the promo code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K 20. That's Chek 20 on checkout to get your 20% discount on your awesome Shilajit gummies. I honestly love these things. I know you're going to be just amazed with how great they taste and how good they feel.
And so maybe one more thing, because I know, there are lots of things we could talk about, but another imagination or visualization is just to see this child from all of the years of her life, from birth all the way to the moment of her death. And to imagine, in this case, we've talked about preconception, so in the life before birth, and then the conception moment, the birth moment, and then really all of the years that he or she have lived so far. So for your son, it might be 45 years, for example. And then cast forward into the next 45 years and see and feel, more importantly, it's kind of a feeling thinking into all of those years until the moment of that young man's death, now an old man. This gives you an amazing amount of information to be able to hold the whole sense of the lifetime for this young person, recognizing that, as we said earlier, Khalil Gibran in the Prophets said it the best. Your children are not your children. They're the sons and the daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but they're not from you, and they're there with you. They belong not to you. So you can give them your love, but not your thoughts. You can house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the land of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You can strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you. And Sweet Honey in the Rock made that into an amazing song, too. So knowing that you have a whole lifespan of this child in your heart, you can actually extend the awareness to before the life and after the life, just as you mentioned with the Dalai Lama, because time outside of our own constrictions, it's a construct, and we can deconstruct it and learn more about who this child was before he was this child and who this child will become. A wonderful book that categorizes that, and in a deeply researched way, is Jenny Wade's book called Changes of Mind. And I'll put all of these in the chat line too. I'll give all the notes for you. So this is a pre-birth to post-death developmental picture of the human being.
That's great.
Extremely well researched. And then, she also, as we're on this topic, made an amazing book called Transcendent Sex. This is the thing I was talking about, where sex at a sacramental level in Ra's picture creates literally light fusion that is equivalent to the light and warmth of the sun. And so that human beings can create this. We have no idea the capacity that we have. And for Steiner, he says the sexual organs, this might be a shocker to some of us, are literally going to shrivel up because they simply will fall out of usage. And we'll be able to, as we were created by the tone, Ross says we're a tone poem, the Elohim actually created the human being using tones. The seven sisters of the Elohim, sort of analogous to the Pleiades, created the human being. We'll be able to bring human beings into form using our own fifth energy center. And so all of this is important to know, not like, oh, this is thousands of years forward. We just mentioned that time is nonlinear. So we are already in the sixth density, just as we're in the third, we're in the first. We're out of this octave altogether and in the previous and future octaves. And we have the capacity to have moments of mastery in all of these densities and octaves at any moment. And we get memories and flashes of the things to come and of the things that have happened. And all of that informs this present moment. So if a parent is able to be open and unlearn any picture that they had of what a child is, this child just flows through with the spiritual world nonstop.
Yes. There's several things I took notes on while you were talking that I'd like to add to the dialogue here, just because I think they're relevant. One, I wish I could remember the guy's name, but there's a sheep farmer from New Zealand that wrote a great book that I found many years ago when I was doing a lot of study of soil science. And New Zealand has a deficiency of the element selenium. And what happens is if they don't supplement the diets of sheep with selenium, they are born with holes in their hearts. And so they found a long time ago that you can circumvent that problem with selenium. And as it turns out, the author of the book started having heart trouble. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You've got a hole in your heart," and wanted the guy to do surgery. And he said, "No, I'm going to fix it myself." And so he put himself on the same basic supplementation program he had his sheep on. And within a year, the heart hole completely closed. And the doctor said it was a miracle. He'd never, ever seen anything like that happen before. And so then the sheep farmer explained to him how he did it. So I thought that might be an interesting thing for you to experiment with, is to do a little selenium supplementation in your son's diet.
I appreciate that.
Because it certainly cannot hurt.
Yeah.
We have the topsoil, as you know, is so deficient in so many things, such as magnesium and many other things, which unfortunately leads people to being told that's why you need to take supplements. But really, that's not a solution. That's a Band-Aid. This is why I'm so pro biodynamic and organic and free range and Korean and all these other natural systems of farming that are really conscious of remineralizing and fertilizing and balancing soil chemistry and producing the right microorganism profile for healthy food, because without healthy food, you can't have healthy animals or plants or humans. And here we all are. The next note that I had was most people that haven't yet had a child and have not ever interacted with a skilled midwife don't realize how much depth and how much value a skilled midwife brings to the birthing process. Angie's worked with very skilled midwives through both of our children's births through her. I didn't have one with my first son. I wish we did. But the midwives are often way deeper and more knowledgeable than the doctors themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't even imagine, and I also want to mention my very good friend and our family OBGYN, Nathan Riley, MD. He has a podcast called The Holistic OBGYN. He was a godsend. I mean, he was, by happen chance, our OBGYN was on vacation right when Zoe came, and his substitute was Nathan Riley. And it was literally like having an angel come and rescue us, because the experience we had with him as the doctor was radically different than with our previous OBGYN, which we left once we found Nathan. And Nathan actually went through the Chek Institute training, became a holistic lifestyle coach, and then integrated all of the Chek teachings with his medical training to produce a truly holistic system. And he has an entire system for guiding parents into the preparation and birthing and post-birthing process. So I highly recommend you guys listening that are interested in that, look up Nathan Riley, MD. in his podcast, The Holistic OBGYN, and he's very, very pro midwife and does a lot of studying with midwives and just is an amazing human being. The other thing is a lot of men traditionally, historically, didn't go to births with their wives. And during war periods, men were gone. And a lot of men have become sadly very detached from the birthing process. And there's a lot of various mindsets. It's a woman's thing. I'm too busy, blah, blah, blah. But I think one of the reasons that we have as much gender imbalance today is because a lot of men that are parents did not go through the birthing process. And one thing I know for sure as a man who's been through three of them, and all three of them turned out to be very challenging. My first wife's birthing process was 72 hours of extremely painful labor and was able to deliver naturally, but it was really, Paul Jr. was quite a big boy and it was quite tough. And Angie had two extremely tough births with Mana and Zoe. And I think for men, if you've not been through a birthing process with a woman, you really probably don't yet understand how incredible a woman is, how absolutely tough they are, far tougher than men are. And, we think we're badasses, but when you actually see the birthing process and participate in it, you'll have a whole new level of empathy, compassion, and respect for a woman. And you will actually be in a much better place to support a woman. A woman goes through so much sleep deprivation in the first year. Current research shows that the average woman's brain shrinks 1 centimeter in the first year being a mother because of sleep deprivation, and the brain just doesn't have the regenerative capacity to rebuild itself, which they say is the source of baby brain, which is a woman that can be very forgetful and short-tempered and emotional. And so when men don't understand what it takes to develop the fetus, to carry it for 9 months, and the challenges of birthing, then they're very detached from the authentic nature of a woman, the challenges she has to go through, the sacrifices she has to make, and the risks that she takes in the whole process, especially the birthing process. So I think for anyone listening that is considering being a parent, it's absolutely critical to do whatever you have to do, in my opinion, even if it meant losing your job so you could make it to the birthing process, because it could be what sets the stage for the rest of your marriage and your capacity to be in harmony with your partner as parents, because you will have a much deeper bond. I think that the bond that I gained with Angie through the birthing process is probably even deeper than our sexual bond, because a walk through some good sex is lovely, but a walk through hell holding hands together, keeping your eyes on the prize, which is, the healthy child, really is like doing a fire walk together, and it bonds you at a level that is something altogether different than the sex act itself. I'm all for sacred sex for sure, but I also know what happened in my 3 children's births. The other thing I wanted to share is that one of the things that I see consistently is parents don't develop healthy rhythms when they have children coming. They're still kind of living this frenetic life of work, 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 go, go, go. Everything's like a buzz, and the kid's now trying to somehow find its place in the middle of this storm of modern living, which I repeatedly have to ground people in what I call 4-doctor rhythms. And so it's very important, in my opinion, as a therapist, to establish what is happy making for you as an individual, what establishes happy making for you as a couple, and how do you build that into your daily and weekly schedule so that you spend time together doing things that are happy making for both of you. Otherwise, you lose your sense of humor about life and everything just becomes about work and making money and surviving. And that's no environment to parent in. And then you have to have healthy rhythms for eating. You have to have rhythms for getting enough physical exercise. You have to have rhythms for effectively resting. And so if you don't have those core values established prior to the arrival, and preferably prior to the pregnancy, chances of you reestablishing those without a crisis to inspire you to do so is poor. I've watched this go on throughout my whole career and saw the negative outcomes of that. Even if you have children, it's critical to establish these healthy happiness, quiet, diet, and movement rhythms, or life will just tear you apart. If you don't have these rhythms to anchor you, you're kind of like a bird that doesn't know what seasons it is. And that's a great way for a bird to die. It doesn't know when to migrate. It doesn't know when to build shelter, et cetera, et cetera. So I think everyone should really consider that. And I cover that in the newer edition of How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. The 4 doctors are covered right in the beginning of the 2nd edition onward. Another thing that I've had a lot of questions about, Edmund, from students and followers of my teachings all over the world and podcast listeners, and this has come up probably at least 20 times in the last several years. People will reach out to me and say, Paul, I've heard you talk about religion and what your concerns are. My wife's Christian or my wife's Jewish or whatever, but I'm this or that. What's your thoughts on how you handle religion for children? And I say, look, one of the most dangerous things you can do is indoctrinate a child into a religion, because then the soul has no choice. I say, my philosophy is if you're going to teach a child religion, it's better to get some teachings like Houston Smith's book on world religion or his audio course, and share a little bit about each of the world religions with your children, and then let them make up their own mind. Don't have a bias towards it. Or if you want to go somewhere, go to a Jewish temple for a while, then go to a Christian church, try a few different types, go to a Unitary church, a Baha'i church, go to an Islamic temple, and allow the kids to see, feel, and experience the vibration of consciousness and the people in each of these world religions. And I said, the worst thing that'll happen is you and your wife will learn a lot, your kids will get exposed to different things, and they will then have an actual sample. So instead of force feeding the kid your favorite food, take them to a buffet and let them try some fish and some chicken and some beef and some lamb and some pork. And they will tell you which ones they like. But to assume that your child must be this religion or that religion is a dangerous thing. And I can tell you that for sure, because there's been at least half a dozen cases in my career where students of mine, and those of you listening, there's been over 63,000 students go through the Chek Institute. So that's quite a number of people that I'm interacting with over all these years, have got a hold of me and said that their child was in some kind of a major crisis, either a health crisis or a psychological crisis or both. And in at least 6 cases, it turned out to be kids that were in Catholic schools living under these very harsh, rigid teachings. And I found that the soul was rejecting that, and it was actually making the child sick. And in each case, I encouraged the children to put their kids in Waldorf schools. And in every single case, they thanked me profusely because the child's illnesses went away within a very short period of time of entering a Waldorf school. And unfortunately, some of these kids had had past lives where they were tortured and traumatized by Christians. And so being in a Christian Catholic school was really making the soul very anxious and struggling a lot, and leading to things like behavioral disorders, eating disorders, various types of neurosis, skin conditions, cognitive disabilities, inability to learn, to think, to stay focused, anxiety, depression. And so I've seen all this happen. And so I think from the parenting perspective, it's remember, that's not your child. It's your responsibility to shepherd that expression of the divine and to give it an opportunity to choose for itself. And I think it's such a high spiritual responsibility to be a parent that if we aren't careful, we can approach parenting from really an ethnocentric orientation, which in meaning is my group against your group. So it sets the child up for a whole life of polarized belief systems and dualistic thinking and competitive, religiosity, which is really more like gangsters competing for territory than it is spiritual development. Another thing is, you mentioned your child having breathing challenges. I've had many people consult me with that exact problem. And it's very important for everybody listening to realize that as parents, whatever your food allergies or food intolerances are very likely to be in your child. And I've had numerous cases of kids that suffered from severe sinus pain due to chronic phlegm production and inability to breathe, especially, or sleep well at night due to nasal congestion, overimmune activity, headaches, and all the things classically common to food allergy and food intolerance. And in every single case, when I had the parents get tested and then the child get tested, the child usually has a combination of the intolerances and allergies of both parents. And once the parents clean those foods out of their diets, then the children's problems go away. And I've seen it happen every single time. So it's very important today to realize that there's so much toxic chemicals on foods. The fact of the matter is we pass our genes on to our kids, but 98% of the world population, according to some studies, have leaky gut syndrome, which sets you up for a long history of food allergies and food intolerances. So we need to be conscious of what it takes to keep the guts of children healthy. And most of what people are feeding kids, remember, only 4%, 4 to 6% of the food eaten worldwide is organic. So that means about 94 to 96% of the world's children are eating poisonous, toxic food with Roundup, glyphosate, which is glyphosate, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, dangerous food colorings, dangerous food additives, many of which are gastrointestinal inflammatory, stressful environments. And so kids quickly develop immune antibodies to anything passing through the gut wall that shouldn't be passing through it. And if they don't have a healthy microorganism profile in their guts, they can be very allergic and very reactive and even autoimmune. So these are some simple things that I really felt I should share because I've got a lot of experience dealing with these issues. One of the things I was wanting you to elaborate a little bit more on, Edmund, and I would like to hear your thoughts. I certainly have some of my own. There's very little in the way of education today for particularly young parents, but some people today don't have parents. Like I've got a friend who's 50 something, and him and his wife are now trying to conceive. And so they're certainly not children or not teenagers or even in their 20s or 30s anymore, but they still have really never had any experience of what it means to be a parent. So we have now got a world full of people that are coming into parenthood, and oftentimes babies come by way of, the side effect of sex, not really wanting a child. And so what are your thoughts for people out there on, even if you didn't know you were going to be a parent, but you've been caught by surprise, what do you feel is wise for the male and the female, the husband and the wife, or the father and the mother, regardless of whether they're married or not, to begin to orient themselves to in preparation for parenthood? And I'll preface this answer from you by saying the biggest thing that I've seen over and over again is that most of the people that are coming into parenting by plan or by happen chance are still in the child archetype, and they still haven't really developed a sense of what it means to sacrifice for the we of the family or the we of the partnership. I've had several cases where young men in the Chek Institute came to me in private and asked for help and said, I feel like I've got to get out of the relationship. My child's only one and it breaks my heart, but this woman's driving me absolutely crazy and I can't deal with all the screaming and I just don't know what to do. I feel like I'm going to drown in this relationship and I want to get out of it. And I've had to spend hours talking to young men about the fact that you're not a child anymore and you can't just always have your way. And it's not just about what you want anymore. And I really think we've got a crisis of the child archetype extending itself. I read a great book by a psychiatrist who actually studied with Steiner initiates. I wish I remembered his name. Liebengood, maybe?
Leavigood. Bernard Leavigood.
Yes.
Yep.
I read, I think, 3 of his books. Excellent material. And, he set up these centers of development to help people learn these things. And what an amazing man. But he said back then when he was writing that the average person's ego wasn't forming till between 36 and 40 years of age. And that's late in the game. That's a little late to be parents. I mean, to be in the child archetype and become a parent is kind of like taking your child to a 5th grade classroom and just dropping your kid off and saying, I'll be back in a few hours, have fun with my kid.
Wow. I mean, there are a lot of different directions we could go with the child archetype. And, and as you said, particularly with men, because they're not going through the transformative process of forming this child within their own bodies, and then that nurturing process that just has to take place because it takes place between mom and child. And in a lot of cases, a man will feel either the lessening of love or even for a while the absence of love from the partner. And this is one of the most triggering things that happens for a man if he's not ready for it and if he hasn't prepared himself. And again, this is where preparing oneself for those capacities to be dealt with. If you have a relationship with the child even before birth, then you're already in a stronger place, developing that connection with the child in the womb. So that soul to soul connection means that the three of you are already all together and on the same page. But so much of the postpartum challenge means that the man has to step up, get himself out of the way, come around the mother in a very strong way on behalf of the whole family. And he's part of that. He's part of what he gets to come around. And if he's not able to do that or doesn't have a picture that, it's like, in the Enneagram, the 6 is the worst case scenario typology, which is what's the worst thing that might happen and how am I going to deal with it? I'm not going to produce fear about it. I'm not going to even have a moment's anxiety about it. Steiner clearly says all fear is useless. I will not let it take hold of me. I will think only of what must be done. And that's the picture for this young man or middle-aged man, doesn't matter, is to say, these are the things that I need to do in my life for now, and I have the capacity to do that. Now, how do you help that individual along the way? It's recognizing that all discipline is self-discipline, for example. And all punishment does is just lessen a child's interest in being around you and make them resentful, and maybe even do bad things to themselves because they feel badly if they internalize it. But the healthy ones will just hate you. It doesn't make you more disciplined. It doesn't bring more joy of life to you. And even disciplining a child, even if it's not this kind of punishment, still does very little good. The most important thing is to realize I am the adult in this situation. I have an ego. I've developed it. I'm not going to wait until I'm 36 to make it happen. I need it now. By having that ego, then I set the kind of the family mood in a certain way with whatever weather is going on with me inwardly. And Goethe has a wonderful quote about that basically in the classroom as the teacher, I determine the weather. At home, I determine the weather. The mother determines the weather in her way and the father in his way, or whatever the sex or gender is of the caregivers. So recognizing that and stepping into it is really essential. Part of what I have noticed, similarly to you in my practice, is the number of feminized males and masculinized females in this world. My wife and I, it's funny, I also have these, this book is a very interesting book called Herland, where this man stumbles into a community of parthenogenesis, which is women who are able to reproduce without males. And he brings along with him, he's the reporter, but he brings along with him two guys, and one is a feminized male and the other is a macho male, and he's pretty balanced. And he writes the book from the perspective of not being needed in a culture as a male and what their response is to not being needed. And this would be a fantastic, my wife and I read this together when we first got together. And the sort of the complement to that is we read this together, Data's Way of the Superior Man. And his picture is that, males, in order to have joy and celebrate who they are and to really come around their women and let the women be women, need to be able to be male. And that doesn't mean in a childish way. As you said, there's a huge difference between being an adult male and still having a childlike nature and having a childish nature. The childlike nature is beautiful for a woman, and she says yes to that. The childish, she just says, go get
stuck.
go get some help. Go get some help, and then come back. And that's difficult for a man who's already in that childish state, especially if primary narcissism is the root of that, and now they're in secondary narcissism because it's all the woman's fault. Obviously, he blames everything on her instead of eating his shadow and projections and taking the work upon himself. Those are the most intractable folks to work with therapeutically because they try to outsmart the therapist and make the therapist the one who has the issues. It's hilarious, actually.
Sad,
but it's not.
really.
Yeah, I was going to say, but it's not hilarious. It's hilarious for the therapist in a certain way, Otherwise, you get driven out of the business through emotional contagion. But it's not funny at all for the wife and for the child, for the family, if that secondary narcissism just blooms and it wreaks havoc.
That is a situation in which most women have to don the pants of the male while
Right.
trying to be a mother.
That's
And
it.
so what happens is not only do they exhaust themselves and then have less and less to give to the child in the times of need because they're depleted, but it leads to a deep resent for the father. And it can lead to the kind of polarized feelings that children are very sensitive to. And the child can pick up on the mother's resent for the father and begin to resent its own father because it's emulating the mother. And that can lead to a very broken life for the whole family, and especially the child, because now the child's pre-programmed with these ideas about dad that are being emotionally conveyed to the child through the mother. And it's almost exactly what happens when husbands and wives go through divorces, but the child ends up living with mom, and she makes it her business to tell the kids how bad dad is. But now the kids have the paradox of thinking dad's this nasty guy, but at a deeper level, craving his connection and wanting a relationship with him. So it's kind of like a manic depressive situation where the child is drawn toward but simultaneously repelled. And it could be the other way too. I've seen it go both ways, men polarizing children against their mother. These are all devastating things to have happen. And I think, this is why I wanted to talk to you about exactly all these topics, because we really have to step up our game, because we're so far down the rabbit hole of these types of dysfunctions that we're really in a global crisis of parenting and education for children. And it doesn't matter. You can't Band-Aid your way out of this thing. You can't just say, well, we're going to put this in high schools or whatever. I mean, this is such a problem that it begins in the individual, because all relationships are made of individuals coming together. So if a person doesn't take responsibility as an individual for what it means to be an adult first in relationship to self and then other, then when a child comes along, the stress of and the responsibilities and all that goes with it is like taking somebody who's got a dysfunctional posture and structure and then loading them up in a CrossFit class, and they think they're getting all this great exercise and they're losing all this weight, but the next thing you know, they've got a severely blown disc and they're laying on an operating table, and now they're afraid to ever exercise again. And so the analogy is you put the pressure of parenthood and birthing into a dysfunctional relationship structure, and it's enough load to actually find all the weak spots, and ultimately the chain breaks at the weakest link, and then everyone loses, including the whole world.
Right. And I mean, this is where particularly we're talking about men in this particular situation. So let's just continue that. This is where a man's friends need to be able to share the non-share, need to be able to step up and say to their friend, hey man, this is what I'm noticing. I love you. I care about you, but I'm noticing what's happening in your family, and you got to step up. It's got to come from somebody you love and respect, and that that they don't have a vested interest in your family getting better. They don't have a skin in that game. They have a skin in their game of their relationship with you. So a man can't put that one aside. He just says, man, my friend is telling me I got to step up. I got to step up, or I'm going to lose respect in his eyes. I've already lost respect in my partner's eyes. I've got to do this. And then he'll find the inner resources to get uncomfortable. And that's a big thing, is to be willing to be uncomfortable. Goethe says that you need to be able to do one thing each day that you don't want to do, but that you need to do. And you need to be able to love it as you're doing it. So shift your hatred or your anxiety or your sadness or whatever procrastination is that's stopping you. Shift your whole mind frame and intentionality around it as you're doing it. And this is that kind of inner discipline that starts to prepare you, along with a meditative life that either you do on your own or you sit knee to knee with your wife for 5 minutes a day. And you guys have agreements and form agreements about how you're going to start talking to each other before baby comes, that you're going to take 3 seconds before you respond to the other person. And if the other person tends to be someone who likes to elaborate and go on, then you say to them, hey, we've got this 3-second thing, but I'm noticing that you're basically still feeling, if I don't jump in and interrupt, then I notice that you're going on. So I think we need a new agreement that you're just going to say what needs to be said, and then there's some space. And so constantly refining and forming new agreements together, and just having grace and space when those agreements aren't held, rather than beating the other person up with it, goes a long way. And being willing to say, this is what I'm feeling, and it's feeling is one word. It's mad, sad, bad, glad, and this is what I need. Knowing that the other person may or may not be able to accommodate that need, but at least you get to get in touch with what the feeling is. You get to name the need, and that helps the other person say, well, what am I feeling, and what is my need? And so these simple things are things you want to practice when you're not in a big conflict situation, and when you don't have this newborn child who's exhausting you and surprising you with all sorts of things that are needs that you've got to cover. If you've got a foundation built where you understand how the other person, what happens when she goes to stress? What does she do? You already need to know that. She needs to know that about you. And then how do I support in that situation? How do we learn to listen at such a deep level? If we've practiced that deep listening with the soul of the baby, we also need to be practicing it with each other. If we have that capacity, then all of a sudden we can start reading some sort of spiritual material together, or listening to it together and discussing it, carving out time, even if it's a few minutes. Consistency is what's essential. A few minutes a day, not like, oh, babe, I need 2 hours. Oh, we need a weekend away. That's not happening. I need 5 minutes in the morning where we spoon each other, or 3, whatever it is. If there's more than 3, great, but at least it's 3 or 2. And that 2 minutes is a world of difference if you do it every day. If you let that to dry up, then you don't have a surplus built in terms of the connection that you have around your relationship. Also figure out, it's nice if your wife asks you to do something and you do it, but can you pay attention to what does she need that you don't even need to ask? And so you're giving something that's unasked, and she recognizes, he sees me. He sees what's happening here. That's potent. And you don't do it to go like, what do you need done? It's what does the family need done? Because oftentimes a woman becomes like the hearth, the repository. So like, well, what do you need me to do for you, babe? It's like, no, brother, what do you need to do for the family? And you're part of the family. Not like, give me some strokes because I vacuum.
Yeah, this brings up the old saying, there is no I in we. And I think that's the child has to get over the I-ness to enter into legitimate we-ness, which is really, in my model, that's expressed as the evolution of love. Love evolves from I-oriented to we-oriented to all-oriented, which parallels a person's conscious awareness of who and what they really are. And I think in order to be a parent, you really need to graduate from I orientation of love to we orientation of love. And it's not an easy transition because it is a growth and development process. It's not like, a good example is, when I was in basic training in the military, they're taking a lot of children and trying to turn them into men. And 8 weeks is sometimes just not long enough. So what you end up with is a bunch of broken kids that either struggle in the military and end up having all sorts of psychological problems and health problems, and ultimately end up getting a medical discharge or something else, a dishonorable discharge because of acting out, or they go through a health or a psychological crisis. I mean, when I was in basic training, we had 4 guys that tried to commit suicide in my own company because they just weren't ready to become a man in 8 weeks. And I think this is why having this conversation with you is so important, because I'm really trying to say, if you want to have children and you have sex organs that can make that happen, then if you're having sex, you should be conscious of the fact that you may be getting an upgrade to the requirement for adulthood every time you make love, even if you're wearing condoms or doing other things, because I know a long list of people that got that surprise. And another thing that's important is when we know a child's coming and we may not have the financial resources, the time resources, or the internal strength, it's very important to get the families of both parties involved any way you can, and just be honest and say, Mom, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle whatever it might be, the lack of time or the pressure or the financial constraints. And whenever you can get, your family involved to support, because there's a reason they say it takes a tribe to raise a child, but we've got this broken family sort of orientation in our culture now where a lot of family members really kind of don't care, oh, my brother's had a kid, that's his problem, I'll go look for 5 minutes and say hi and get the hell out of there. That really can lead to a lot of broken relationships and broken families and a lot of pain. And I think we need to go back to seeing the gift of a new child as a gift to the whole family and also as a responsibility to the whole family, because the child is part of the family. They're not just somebody else's kid. And, we can also see that the social engineering that really became obvious during COVID is pushing family units into more and more segregation, isolation, and degradation. And we have to be conscious enough to ignore cues from on high that are coming from psychopathic people that really are broken children that are in positions of power and don't really realize what they're doing to people, which means you have to have the ability to discern truth from fallacy. And, my rule is any law that's unlawful is criminal to follow. So if they're trying to use mandates and regulations to destroy a family unit, there's no medicine in that whatsoever. And the results have been devastating, as you know. So these are some of the things that are deeply important and concerning. Now, we've talked about a fair bit of the next couple of questions, so I'll just post them. And if you want to add anything that we may not have added, what are some of the most important essentials that we as parents can give both our children? And what are the essentials all teachers or education systems should provide for children in general? We've covered that a fair bit, but if there's anything you want to add, feel free.
I mean, obviously there's a whole lot more. And let me just see if there's any piece that really hits me.
Well, while you're thinking, I'll throw a couple on the table. One, you need to have high quality food. You've got to go out of your way to find local farmers markets, clean food raised by conscious farmers. You've got to find at least a high quality source of spring water, or at least get a proper water filtration system or water structuring device.
Yeah, there's an app for that, Paul, that is a national spring water app. And we'll put it down in the show notes for where all the spring water is that's available around the country.
There's also one called findaspring.com that does worldwide spring sources.
Perfect.
The other thing, with food and water also is electromagnetic pollution. I mean, the fact, it's a fact that the amount of electromagnetic pollution that we're dealing with, 5G and other things, military radar systems, communication systems, electrical circuits in houses can alter the development of a fetus and disrupt the development of a child at all stages of development. And so Ibrahim Karim's biogeometry home kit, it's only $250. It'll handle 4,000 square feet, comes with connections to the water mains and the electrical mains, and will neutralize any negative electromagnetic effects in a house of 4,000 square feet, and actually turns it into healing energy through the use of that technology, which I think is absolutely essential for any house with not only parents, but people in general, just so your body can restore itself and you can sleep properly. So those are just a couple of thoughts that popped into my head.
Yeah, you mentioned the food, and there's the physical aspect of food, and there's also, and certainly Ra talks about this quite a bit, which is that there's the physical chemical body complex, and then there's the vitality complex. And throughout his communication with Carla and Don, her as the instrument, she had a tendency to use the vitality for the physical portion at times, or vice versa, to use the physical energy for the vitality, which can actually cause an entity to be non-viable physically, because she had such a love and an openness, but it moved into a lack of wisdom. And Don had to actually guard against that. And that gives an indication for the importance of the vitality in food. When I tell people that we were able to create such vitality in farming in Florida that I was able to eat just watermelon for 6 months, the first thing they say is, well, what about the protein? Then they ask about all sorts of other nutrients that I supposedly didn't get. it's very difficult for them to understand that I had more energy, more clarity, more emotional compassion. I worked all day long and actually lived out in the woods there because there's a way to build through consciousness vitality into food. And I want to make sure that that point doesn't get missed when we're looking for food. Just because it says, for example, organic, and only 4% of it is organic on the planet, the organic standards, due to mass-produced individuals who realized, oh, organic makes twice as much money. Now I'll get into that. They've lobbied successfully to say 95% of this can be organic and 5% can be all kinds of things that you don't want to ingest. So organic doesn't mean anything anymore. And knowing that and having the sensitivity with your nose, with your taste, with the energy sensitivity of your palms to know this food is vital. It's vitality. Don't look for the level organic anymore, or even biodynamic. It's the same in biodynamic farms. And I know this because we used to run a biodynamic farm and we used to visit a lot of biodynamic farms. I was a member of Demeter, and it's one of the reasons that I became disillusioned with that. You have to be able to have discernment in today's world with everything. And you can have discernment for the vitality in food because, as Goethe said, this human body is the most sensitive scientific instrument that we have, bar none. We'll never get anything even close. And use that and believe in it and use the body to find ways to say, is this food what I need, what my family needs? Ask your soul. The other way is to get lost in a miasma of materialism and believing what other people tell you. And we just can't. We're in a world of self-initiation now. Everything we do needs to be a world where we self-initiate. And we have the capacity to do this. And that's what Steiner really came here to do. Both he and Ra very clearly said this analytical nature, we had to have this capacity in order to free ourselves from the rhythms of the planet, from even to break family bonds, in order to be free and then consciously reconnect. We've been given all that as an unconscious gift, and now it's our opportunity to consciously weave that back together in mastery for ourselves. And the discipline of Hakomi, mindfulness, for example, and embodied psychotherapy that works psychodynamically also weaves together that threefoldness. And Hakomi calls itself, that's Hokomi, calls itself this assisted self-development, which means it goes beyond the realm of therapy where you take away the imprimatur of the therapist client. Already you have that dynamic of like father and son, right? There's a power dynamic that exists in therapy, which is why it only works half the time. Well, there are a lot of reasons it also doesn't work, which are the undigested contents of the therapist, not able to handle the anger of the client or the sadness. And so extending that range, that inner range of what is the movement of depression? What is the movement of mania? And how do I actually, with my soul, move to that level of mania when I'm in front of that individual? Move to that level of depression. I don't have any fear about being caught in that, but energetically, I have to be able to match that individual in front of me. And if I can't, I'm not fit to do therapy. And so converting all of those things that are emotions into movements, which are upstream before we even label them emotions, and being able to have that emotional range of motion, not just in a therapeutic container, but at all times. This is something that for those of you that are parents that want to get some therapeutic work done, a good Hakomi therapist will help you work in an embodied way, in a very holistic way, and will put you in the driver's seat as you being your own self-initiator. So those kinds of things, I throw out a few possibilities there.
Yeah, they're all very important. And on the food issue, in my Spirit Gym lessons, under the principle of the 6 foundation principles, which is, it's broken down into principles, Spirit Gym 1 through 10. So the 6 foundation principles is under this principle of the 6. And in the section on Dr. Diet, I actually go through a whole series of ways you can develop the sensitivity to know whether food is high quality, nutritionally deficient, et cetera, et cetera. So I talk about ways you can do that. But I think, once again, because of the breakdown in the certifications and the corporatization of biodynamic and organic food and all the things you mentioned, which is very true, there is no replacement for going to the farmers markets, because the farmers, a lot of farmers don't have a lot of profit. They're kind of just surviving, which is sad. But so they can't afford organic certifications, and they don't get a lot of these organic certifications don't give them any support to get their soils balanced and really produce truly organic food. So they simply don't spend the money. But having talked to many of them, in fact, all over the world, you'll find lots of them that are using organic farming principles, who are very, very conscious of using chemicals and pest control and produce really high quality food. So not only is it important to go to the farmer's market and look, feel, smell, touch, taste, but to look the farmer in the eye and ask them, are you using chemicals on this food? Are you farming organic or based on organic principles? And pick up the vibration of the farmer themselves, or even the workers from the farm, because their health and vitality, their brightness, the energy of their soul, the brightness of their eyes, their ability to make eye contact and to look you in the eyes and tell you the truth is a very good truth measure of what's in the food. Countless people are buying garbage food and telling me, oh, there's no organic food around, or I can't find good food. But I go on the internet in 5 seconds and find out that there's 4 farmers markets within a 10 or 20 mile drive of their house, and they're too lazy to even look. And you can't afford to do that as a parent, or you're going to have a very miserable life, and you're going to create a very miserable life for your child to live in a sick body all the time.
There are grassroots movements. I mean, the other thing to say is, of course, grow your own organic food. And then
we do that.
Really know. But there are grassroots movements of individuals inside communities. And we have someone who's actually on the property now doing it, where she is doing exactly what you're saying, Paul. She's finding these relationships to these farmers, and they're almost always small farmers who have a huge heart, have good knowledge, are strong working, and they're building vitality into this food. And then what she's doing is she's becoming the middle person, but she's not doing the 100% or even 400% markup that some of these specialty organic and so-called food stores are doing. And she's making sure she only works with ethical individuals. And this is what Steiner said, the purpose of us being on the planet now is to develop ethical individuality, where it's the I-we thing. We have a strongly developed I being, and we recognize that it's developed so that we can be a we being and open ourselves to all others. So they're only marking this food up maybe 10%. They're making just enough to make it work for themselves, just like the farmers are, and they're giving this to a whole community, and they've already done the work of making sure the relationships with these farmers is person to person, and the food is exactly as it should be, vitalized. There's love in it. And so I just want to encourage communities to do that, because as we know, the prices of food have skyrocketed and will likely continue to skyrocket.
Yes. My next question is, what are some resources parents can use for supporting themselves and their children, such as homeschooling options or anything else you can offer? Just across the board resources for parents and the support of their children. Because as we've discussed, and as most people that listen to my podcast know, that the public school systems have reached an all-time low. They're in a crisis, and the curriculums are way outdated and quite frankly, garbage for the most part. And there's whether it be the kinds of things we've already been talking about, farming, Hakomi therapy, counseling with someone like you, and because I know you're available for counseling. We'll talk about that as we close. I just think it's important for people to know what kinds of things, even if you don't know where they're at, you, Edmund, don't know what we can encourage them to look for.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to be conscious in your community about what you're building together, because so far we have, am I going to homeschool my kid, or am I going to put him in a public school, or am I going to put him in a private school? There's another option, which is how do we start supporting each other in small groups or pods to work together? And that's how you're going to develop best practices. But the other thing is that you're going to have socialization for the child. And that is so essential at all ages, not to sequester them in your own home. First of all, it makes everybody crazy, or I kind of hope it does, so that you do have to get out. And how is it that you can design group activities together? It doesn't matter how small the group is. It just matters that they have other people their own age to be with. And you have mothers and fathers with ideas about what activities to do together. And now you're working together as a community. That's the strongest resource that you can provide, because then you've got support. You can talk to each other about your challenges and questions. You don't have to go to me as a therapist because you actually have somebody who's on the ground doing the same thing you are, unless something comes up for you that goes beyond the psychoeducational piece. But that psychoeducational piece can handle 90% of what needs to be covered in a human being. And if it goes beyond the other 10%, then you seek somebody out if you want to do some deeper work or just higher level deeper work or spiritual work. That's something, of course, that's available. So those things I've seen be very, very potent. And you can then actually hire those individuals when you have 8 kids or something. They're very happy to come to you rather than to you schlepping them all around, spending your time doing that. And they bring their expertise. You've got the kids together. That's an amazing opportunity. And in a way, it's like a one-room schoolhouse, but now it's really directed by the parents rather than you went to the one-room schoolhouse and you did what that teacher told you to do, and they did probably what somebody else told them to do. That's one of the biggest recommendations I have about how do we provide resources for each other. And I've been in conversations with folks about, do you come together with a large tract of land and then build houses there and each individual is able to own them, but you're consciously creating a community? Or do you build it on the basis of business and you actually build toward a small town? And you're creating a town. And we tend to think, well, we've got so much urban sprawl or all of this so far, but how much of that has been intelligently designed? And through business relationships where we know when money gets involved, you get to see if somebody's trustworthy. You get to see what their self-worth is like, what their work ethic is like. You develop a love of people through that. And Steiner clearly said that a lot of initiates in today's world are going to be entrepreneurs. And so instead of vilifying some kind of business as being bad because it has to do with money or whatever, abundance, there is a way where if you can survive in that realm, it's like surviving in the political realm. If you can still hold a candle in the political realm today and still vibrate at fourth density love vibration, fifth density wisdom vibration, man, hats off to you. And same thing in the educational sphere and same thing in a lot of the corporate business sphere. There are many incredible people who are holding their own in that. And that may be a way to build actually a town together. So now you have commerce, you have products that you design together that you can sell globally because of today's global market. That's sustainable for a community. And that's not something that's easily wiped off a map.
Yes. Some of the things that came to my mind that I think are good for anybody that has kids or wants to have kids to be aware of is the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And they have some great books on feeding children.
Yeah.
Nourishing Traditions is an excellent book for every family to have by Sally Fallon.
Yep.
The PricePottinger.org, Price Pottinger organization, very similar to Weston A. Price. They have newsletters, articles. The Soil Association, which is the British Soil Association, if you just search Soil Association, they've got a great newsletter. Zen Honeycutt is the founder of a great organization called Moms Across America, and she provides a lot of excellent information. There's fantastic podcasts with her out there. Children's Health Defense, which is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s organization, is an excellent newsletter that keeps you updated with things like legal issues, vaccine issues, food issues, toxins, things parents need to know about. GreenMedInfo.com is Sayer G's organization, and they have an excellent newsletter. Mercola.com is also a great resource. And for those that are having challenges with money and their money mindset and creating abundance, my longest running client, one of my best friends, Jason Picard, has a program called the Abundance Archetype Training Program, which is like a mentorship program where he teaches you how to create not only financial abundance, but abundance in all areas of your life. And he's an extremely successful man, not only financially, but in all areas. And I have 3 podcasts with Jason, all of which are excellent. So if you want to find him or just search Abundance Archetype Jason Picard, and you'll find it. Those are just some of the things based on our conversation that I think are all things people need to be aware of, because within these networks, you'll find like-minded people with high values and with the kind of values that are, shall I say, socially conscious, that are moving the planet in the right direction at a time of need. So the more of these sources of people and interests. And most of these organizations have conferences and things that, you can go to, like Weston A. Price not only has a conference every year, but they have a podcast that's very good. And a lot of them have podcasts. So I think you got to kind of tap into the networks that carry the values and the love and the respect for life and nature and food and each other that we want to be surrounded by to raise children, or we're kind of like lost in the desert with all this stuff.
Yeah, the tendency for many in today's world, I heard a phrase of the fuck you family. And the fuck you
Jesus.
the fuck you family has enough resources, has enough money that they can live off the grid and they can basically move into kind of a protectionism place. And this is a danger because this is a second chakra regression. So we're in a third chakra world right now, and we're moving toward fourth. But this is a kind of regression toward protectionism and clan and even an animal mentality if we're not careful. It's the shadow side of there's nothing wrong with being prepared. But if a prepper moves into sequestering, his or her family away from the world, this is the very time when we need to be making all of these connections you just talked about, to be a joiner on the planet and to stay with everybody, because we're going to make it all together. Those of us that choose to stay together, the ones that are in a second chakra sort of pull away regression, I think are fooling themselves. We need to be together. We need each other. And there is so much more potency and power. There's a spiritual law that all that you see around you that is so-called negative or lesser than is only there because so much light is now available on this planet. So much consciousness, so much potential to use our minds to actually create things. The shadow side is our minds now. If we move into anger, we create cancer for the self, but we can just as easily absolve that. But thoughts are becoming things. This is the advent of the fourth dimension.
Well, that's the next question, actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I'll move us forward if you're ready. But
jump ahead.
One thing I wanted to say on the concept of the fuck you family is that goes against the principle of diversity in nature. Like if you look at what I've just shared like 6 or 7 different organizations you can join and meet interesting people and learn interesting things, put more wheels in your spokes in your wheel, which makes it a more stable wheel. But the fuck you family is opposite. That's chopping spokes out of the wheel and saying, hey, don't get too close to me. Fuck off. That's monocropping is what that is. That's how you destroy survivability. And, anyone that makes it through a crisis gets through with the help of other people. No one's an island in the world.
Steiner said that the purpose for being on this planet is the human encounter. Yeah. And we're not going to have human encounters by sequestering.
No. And I think it's also important to remember the ancient adage, those that play together stay together. And so not only do we need to play with our kids, but play with each other. I mean, yes. It's time for adults to remember how to play. Steiner warned that most parents should not play with their kids because they keep being so judgmental that it makes it uncomfortable for the child to play and they lose their play nature. And that he said parents should learn to play before they play with kids, or it has the opposite effect. I don't have a lot of friends simply because I'm very focused on my work, as you know. But the friends that I do have, like you, Jason, Kyle Kingsbury, many of the people that I do podcasts with, we really enjoy each other's company and sharing ideas and concepts and getting together to hang out and just celebrate life and let our kids mingle. And so that playing together is to sing, to dance, to share a bag of smoke, or to drum, or to rattle, or to garden, or to climb, or to build a tree fort, or, these are the things that we've gotten so caught in this industrial flatland. People have forgotten how to live. And I think if you forget how to live, then stress really is a problem because you don't know how to manage stress with anything other than drugs. But play is a great antidote to stress.
Absolutely. And the other piece, I think you did ask in an earlier question around, what support can parents have? And this is not just for parents, but as you said, for human beings, is what are my resources? what are the things when I do get stressed out or forget who I am, or to be playful or funny, loving with anyone that I'm around? Is it that I need to take a walk in nature? Is it I need to do a conscious breathing practice? Is it that I need to eat my favorite food? But we should be able to have 100 things that are resourcing for us. And we should be able to, well, I'm not going to shit on you. I'm inviting people to figure out what those 10 things are, or 20 or 100, and practice them when you're not under stress. Practice them when the relationship is good. That way, if I start to get in a tense situation with my wife, I've already grown the practice around these things, and I'm already breathing and finding myself, oh, I'm breathing. Oh, I just yawned and brought my parasympathetic nervous system online, and my sympathetic need to flee or fight against her is disappeared.
That's straight up what I call doctor happiness practices, right? If you
Mm,
don't know how to shift into joy, and if you don't practice it regularly enough, you forget what joy feels like, or you don't know how to get back to the experience.
right.
A good example is just the other day, my kids were having fun. Zoe was playing I think a xylophone or a steel drum, and Mana was playing the flute, and they were up on the second floor. And I walked into the house, which, when you walk in our front door, it's quite a big open area, but they were filling the house with this joyful music. And even though it was just two little kids playing, it was actually quite entertaining. And it filled the house with the joy of children, and things like that need to be inspired so that we all learn how to balance ourselves instead of, having to go to a doctor and get a pill, or, drown ourselves in soap operas and in the garbage of the world. But, and that's really, again, heading to this next question. Edmund, the world is changing toward a digital virtual reality simulation. It's being driven by people and corporations that are clearly detached from nature, natural principles and practices, and is an environment that traps people in the mental dimension while pulling one's roots from such dimensions of consciousness as the mythic, the magic, and the archaic, which is the earth itself.
Mm.
How do you suggest parents and children old enough to understand what we are sharing here today navigate this environment, not only now, but in the futures from Steiner's perspective? Because it's like a good example is there's quite strict requirements to have your kid in a Waldorf school with exposure to digital media. And I totally get that. But I also feel that we have to be conscious of the world our children are going into.
We do.
And you actually can cripple a child's ability to interface,
Yes.
because the rate at the world's changing now compared to when you and I were kids is rapid. I mean, like, they will see as much change in 20 years as you and I did in our whole life. And it's moving toward robotics. It's moving towards high digital. It's, you and I know what it's going toward. And I did a podcast called The Danger of Living in Two Realities, and I compared the digital and the analog. So if you guys listening haven't listened to that podcast or watched it, there's a video version of it as well. It's called The Danger of Living in Two Realities. How do we find the balance in all this? Because this digital reality is being pushed on us so heavily by the Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gateses of the world and the government, and it's a form of policing and mind control and a lot of negative stuff.
Mm.
It's taking people further and further away from the reality of the elements of Earth in which life actually takes place. The analogy I gave in my podcast is you can have a whole garden on your phone, but you never have to water it. You have no responsibilities to it. It's a digital garden. But the one in your backyard, every minute you spend on your phone fantasizing about that garden, the one in the backyard may be dying and you end up starving to death because you're caught in a digital reality. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as a Steiner educator on how can parents balance these two worlds?
So the big picture of not just legacy media, but social media, so-called social media, largely anti-social media, this capacity for artificial intelligence, has really made its way to the planet, and particularly the capacity to allow the individual to lapse into not thinking for himself. either as an adult, but particularly as a child who has access to these things, to start to write their papers for them, to start to do their thinking for them.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Well, and again, it's a natural opportunity that has to take place because there aren't very many of them, but there are entities who are 95% focused on making sure that they are able to indoctrinate as much of the planet as possible into under their kind of control and organization and elitism. And they are really believing that what they have to offer is the best thing possible, because you will learn under them the disciplines of the personality focused on the self, focused on self-love. Their tendency is to absorb everything toward the self. And this is, I think, it's attractive initially for folks who don't have an idea that this is moving them toward an area where they may be moving away from where they've polarized for much of their existence. But we need to have this opportunity, and it's becoming very finely nuanced, to serve ourselves. We need to be given this possibility and to be able to be conscious enough or not to say, I still choose to serve all. And this is why this temptation or distraction is here, because it's one of those great awakeners for the world today. It's hard to be those who love to serve others and look at what's happening with this and not be horrified and shocked by it. But it also provides an incentive to even more contribute to the world rather than sit back on our laurels, for those of us who want to serve others. And that's the wonderful capacity that it brings. And so I would want to invite us to focus on, what does it invite us to do? Because those individuals who are dead set on the control, rape, manipulation, mental servitude, not just for this lifetime, but for lifetimes to come of other entities, are doing their best to harvest those individuals underneath their so-called care. If we have the level of focus even approaching their level of discipline in elitism, we don't even have to actually get close to it. I mean, we can get within 20 percentage points of it, whereas they've got to do it quite a bit more. Then, as a whole unit of humanity, overnight we'll be in a new place with each other, and those individuals will be elsewhere. And that's a spiritual law of something that's taken place for eons in the Creator's existence. And so, from a much higher perspective, watching this thing go on, the right response to it is love. And love opens us up to understanding and giving us insight into why it's placed in creation, why at this time. Anything else actually inducts us into negativity and pulls us away from polarizing positive. And this is the great opportunity that we have, is to notice that it's going on and to be unswayed by its pull into the black hole of negativity, and to continue to say, I'm going to shine even more brightly as a result of knowing, if this is in the world, it's a confirmation that there's even more light available, because more light creates more shadow. Looking at that from that perspective then gives me the courage to put my phone down when I'm around my kid, not to bring my phone to the dinner table, not to leave it in the bedroom when I'm sleeping, turning it on to silent mode or turning it off as much as possible, taking a tech-free day at least one day each week, or many hours each day, and it's the same time the alarm goes off and I turn the phone off. All screens are off. I wasn't raised with television, so I never watched television. I don't have a relationship to it. But I can tell you that if you don't watch it and get sucked into it, because as Edward Bernays and the propaganda group, he's a relative of Freud, were able to figure out 100 years ago, there's a way to just operate on the same wavelength of the human brain where no learning takes place and you're completely hypnotized into an automaton. But if you turn on the television and if you don't look at the screen and you just pay attention to what's going on and what you're feeling, that's a great exercise for someone who is an addict for television. It's a similar thing to when I teach groups of individuals how to move. I've been teaching, for example, adults how to be playful their whole lives. And that's part of my dissertation. So it's funny that you mentioned the playfulness. Is if you watch an activity, your eyes, because embryologically they're direct extrusions of the brain, and the brain can fool you. But if you turn your back on the situation that's happening where individuals are playing, you'll feel if the play is healthy or not. You won't be distracted with the eyes that are this extrusion of the brain. It's the back of the heart between the shoulder blades. It's called the Lindenblad. It's a sacred point where you can pay attention. And I've used this for 35 years teaching kids and adults how to play. You know when an injury is about to occur. And I mean an emotional injury where one kid says something unkind to another, or a physical injury, and you can simply turn around and trust it, call out, everybody stops, and you look, your whole body turns to the place where it's about to occur, and you just go, what's happening over there? He what a bum 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 bum. And in trusting that, that's how you can pay attention. You can use the same thing for the whole world of the digital. Is don't look at the screen and just hear what's going on, and then tune into it with your soul. And you'll realize it's either a waste of time, or it's attempting to manipulate me. It's attempting to entertain me into distraction and sleep.
Yeah, good. All great stuff. Well, we had a great long run here today. We're right around 3 hours, but it's 3 very, very important and rich hours. So I'm very grateful for your time. Now, Edmund, people can hire you for consulting privately. Is that what I understand?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've started to do online. I've kept away from. This is ironic that this is the segue, right? I've stayed away from doing any online work, but my dear friend Jared has pulled me into the 2-dimensional realm, and we're doing our best to make it 3-dimensional. Yeah, I have a postdoctorate in family systems and couples, and working with kids as well. And individuals. And I love doing that work, and I found it actually very satisfying online. I also do Steiner spiritual consulting. So not just for individuals who are struggling, but for individuals who want to go a lot deeper with their lives. And then I think Jared has certainly been convincing me, and Paul, you've been convincing me it's time to offer something online to a group. And I think related to this parenting piece, I just got super fired up when you asked me, hey, would you do something on this topic? And I'm finding my excitement and feeling the need. So I think I'll probably in the new year in 2025 offer a group. And you can just, it's edmundknighton.com is my website. And you can just check in on there and see when that comes up.
Yeah, let's spell that for everybody.
Oh, yeah. My name is EDMUNDKNIGHTON, Knighton, KNIGHTON.com.
So edmundknighton.com to reach Edmund for private consulting. I highly recommend it. I mean, if you've listened to the podcast, you know Edmund's the real deal, or I wouldn't even have him on the podcast. I have pretty strict standards, and he met those a long time ago. What a phenomenal share, Edmund. You have something else you want to share?
I was just going to mention my buddy and I, Jared, have been doing this amazing thing called Be Here Man. And we've also realized women and men need this and need to be together. So we're doing something called Being Human that's also going to start in 2025.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a podcast with Jared on that as that approaches. So everybody will learn a lot more about that. So if you enjoyed this conversation, we'll get into being human together in our next round. Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I always love listening to what you have to share. I love Steiner's perspectives. I love Ra's perspectives. And I just love learning and growing myself. It's one of the greatest gifts of my podcast is just to get to spend time with people like you and really pick up a lot of really useful information from legitimately wise people. So thanks for all that you've shared today. And thank you to all of you guys listening. I mean, if you've made it this far, then I trust you realize how important what we're talking about is. And I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to all of you. And thank you for sharing the episode with anybody you think would benefit from what was shared today. I'd like to share a big thank you to my sponsors, because without them, the podcast wouldn't be possible. And everything my sponsors produce is excellent for your family, your children, and my family and my children all utilize all the products from the sponsors because they meet my value standards. You can join the podcast membership if you'd like at paulchek.com. It's very reasonable, and you get all the extended plays. I made an exception today because I thought this conversation was too important to break up. I thought everyone needs to hear this. So a reminder for all of you that are podcast members, you will be offered a 1-hour meeting with Edmund by internet meeting, probably on Zoom or something similar, which will be announced to the podcast members at the Spirit Gym podcast website, which is myspiritgym.com for anyone that wants to see Spirit Gym and for the members. And we will have an amazing opportunity for each of you to ask Edmund as many questions as he can get in within an hour or so. So lots of love to all of you. Edmund, any final words as we part for the day?
Just when you're in that situation where you're struggling with your kid or with your partner, start to pay attention to which energy center is active right now. Is it my power energy center? Am I trying to control the situation? Am I being ruled by survival? Is it my emotional energy center? Is it my communication center where I want to try to be articulate and feel like I'm smart and powerful? Or am I actually able to trust that I can just listen to the situation and that anything that needs to be revealed will be revealed through that deep listening?
Awesome. Well, lots of love to you, Edmund. I look forward
Likewise.
to any chance we have to continue our friendship and our offerings to the public through the podcast and other things that we can do.
Me too.
And thank you to all of you guys. I look forward to sharing something super exciting with you in our next podcast. Aho, Great Spirit. It is done. It is done. It is done.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Edmund Knighton. Edmund will be holding a live Q&A session exclusively for members of Paul's Spirit Gym podcast membership. If you'd like to take part in this opportunity, you can subscribe by going to paulchek.com/podcast. With your membership, you'll also get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. Your support helps keep the show running and allows us to bring you even better content. So if you're ready to dive deeper and unlock all these amazing extras, as well as participate in the live Q&A with Edmund, head over to paulchek.com/podcast and become a Spirit Gym podcast member today. You can find Edmund online at edmundknighton.com. That's edmundknighton.com. On his website, you can find out more about his services and programs and request a complimentary 15-minute consultation. Edmund will be co-hosting the Be Human program with Jared Picard starting in February 2025. For more details on this, please visit beherefarm.com/human. For more of the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast, where you can find details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Wild Pastures, Paleo Valley, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channel, and his blog. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.